You can begin recording. Welcome everybody to our Provo Municipal Council meeting for Tuesday evening, May 5th, 2020, time 5:31. This meeting will be conducted entirely via electronic means due to the risks of public gatherings associated with the spread of COVID-19. Governor Gary Herbert has waived the anchor location and certain other requirements for public meetings and noticing as outlined in the Executive Order 2020-5. The meeting will be available to the public for live broadcast and on-demand viewing at https://www.youtube.com/user/Provo City Council. The council requests that attendees help maintain the decorum of the meeting by silencing electronic devices, being respectful to others, and to wait to speak until called upon by myself, the chair. In the current situation where the meeting is being held via Zoom webinar service and broadcast over YouTube, I recommend you turn off your mics when not speaking so as to minimize the potential for background noises and conversations picked up, recorded, and broadcast for all to hear, including sneezes. We will begin with a roll call. That was a joke to tease whoever was sneezing. But anyway, I digress. We'll begin with a roll call, and if I can pull up my speaker view here, I can actually do this. Okay, so I am joined here by fellow council members Bill Fillmore, David Harding, Dave Shipley, Shannon Ellsworth, Travis Hoban, and Dave Sewell, also by Mayor Michelle Kafusi, Chief Administrative Officer Wayne Parker, Brian Jones, and Cliff Strachan. And various staff are also here, some of whom will be presenting and some of whom are assisting us. We will begin with an opening prayer given by Councilor Dave Shipley, after which I will give the Pledge of Allegiance.
Mr. Hanley, it's Mr. Fillmore is giving the prayer this time.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Fillmore.
Okay. Our dear Heavenly Father, we bow our heads before Thee this evening as we commence another meeting of the Provo City Council, and invite Thy guidance and blessing during our meeting and our deliberations. We thank Thee, Father, for the privilege we have of serving this wonderful city, and we invoke Thy blessing upon the citizens of Provo and invite Thy Spirit to be with us tonight. We ask a special blessing, Father, upon our citizens here in this city, our state of Utah, our country, and throughout the world, as we contend with this current pandemic. We pray that Thou might extend Thy hand and alleviate the sufferings of Thy children throughout the world. We pray that we might be inspired here in Provo to do our part for our people. We ask again for Thy blessing tonight to please guide us that we might be fair and reasonable in all respects. We ask this in the name of Thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Mr. Fillmore. All right, I will do the Pledge of Allegiance on behalf of everybody. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, we will begin with a presentation from our Mayor, Michelle Kafusi, who will be making a presentation for the fiscal year 2020-2021 budget. Welcome, Mayor Kafusi.
Thank you, Council Chair Hanley, and hello to all my friends. And I miss seeing you. I miss our side conversations. So it's good at least to see your faces. As you know, this has been a tough budget year. We actually, and I can't remember which one of the council members started the conversation, but they said, wow, we started off seeing and hearing budget presentations, and everything was just rosy, and then all of a sudden, boom, the pandemic hit and the whole conversation flipped. And so I beg you to keep that in mind when it comes to discussion on the budget tonight. I do want to just tell you and say publicly how grateful I am for Wayne and Isaac and Dixon and John Borgett's team. They have been so patient with me. I tend to put a lot of thought, and probably too much. In fact, I can hear my mom's voice in my head saying, don't overthink it. But when it comes to the taxpayers' money, I overthink it. And many nights we would spend hours on the whiteboard in our conference room going over the budget. And then I would say, okay, and they would all be on bated breath waiting for a decision. I'd say, now I'm going to go home and sleep on it. And we'd go back and come back, and I'd ask him, is it okay if we start over? I need to walk through this again. And I also want to express thanks to my directors. They have been so exceptional during this hard budget year. They have been, I've been able to call them at all hours and say, explain to me your thoughts on this. What if we were to do this? What do you think? I've been able to text them, and they've been very responsive. So it's just been such a huge team effort on our side, like nothing I've ever seen before. This is my third budget, and it's definitely been the one I've spent the most hours on and the most worried, sleepless hours on. But I think we finally have landed where I'm comfortable with it at this time. For those of you that have been in on this budget process before, no, I kind of like to send a letter to the council that talks to you more on a personal level and kind of just does a high level about the budget. And I like the way that works. I like the feel of it. So I decided to go with it again, even in this crazy year. I was reviewing some of my past letters, and last year it was the issue with Officer Shinners was in that letter, and I just was flooded with all those. I mean, the budget's a real emotional thing. For all you who want to be a mayor when you grow up, get ready. The budget is much more emotional because it's people's livelihood, is the taxpayers' dollars, and for me, that's just a huge responsibility on my shoulders. So with that, I'm going to read this letter. And again, thank you for everyone who's helped. I think everyone will be pleasantly surprised. I've even talked to all the Utah County mayors and asked them the budget. What are you doing with your budget? And they were all, the ones I've gone a little more into depth with are pretty shocked that we were able to pull off what we did. So I'm going to read my letter, and then I'll turn the time over to John Borgett, and he is going to go through a budget highlights where he dives a little bit deeper into the details and specifics. So if you'll just bear with me, and I'll get started. So dear members of the Provo Municipal Council, as you will recall, this year's budget process started so smoothly. Our revenue forecasts were looking great. Life was a breeze. Then a pandemic hit, taking the lives of many and stopping the rest of us in our tracks. While the greatest tragedy has been the loss of life, the financial tragedy is also very real. Thankfully, I feel I can say the Provo City Administration has risen to the budget challenge. We have spent many hours examining options and making tough calls. Our directors asked us to be surgical, so we put on our face masks and performed financial surgery. I thank those directors who pointed to deep cuts they were prepared to take for the team. A 1.5% cut was imposed on all other general fund departments, with the notable exception of police and fire. We felt good about leaving these two departments untouched as a symbol of our gratitude for our noble police officers and firefighters. Additional highlights. Based on your desires, I am pleased to announce that we have provided funds for an update to our general plan, a foundational guiding document for our city. And I am grateful we have been able to fund most of our employee compensation package, with only two components being held back: our market-based increases and the popular sick leave buyback program. We will be monitoring revenues throughout the year, though, and if they exceed our projections, it's my hope that we can at least partially reinstate these programs. To provide flexibility in the budget, including if revenues are worse than anticipated, I am imposing a soft hiring freeze throughout the city organization, meaning directors will need to get my approval before filling any vacancies. This will help us be nimble in adjusting to whatever the financial year brings. Allow me to end by sharing two things I believe in, and one is saving for a rainy day. The other, knowing when it's raining. I'm proud to announce that under my watch, Provo City's Rainy Day Fund has reached an all-time high. On June 30th, 2017, shortly before I was elected, the balance was about $13,600,000. By the end of last fiscal year, we pushed that amount to almost $17 million. That's right, we created a more than 24% increase in 2 years. When I was seeking this office, I told people I was a penny pincher, and I'm very glad now for the additional pennies we have stored away. But now it's raining, and I think it would be wrong to put a padlock on our rainy day funds just when the thunder is clapping. Instead, I want to show our employees that their scrimping and saving while the sun was shining will pay off for them now in their night of rain. Council members, I am very pleased to present to you our fiscal year 2021 trimmed down but battle-ready budget. With your support, I believe this budget will be a bridge to successful days ahead for all of us in this magnificent city. Sincerely, Mayor Michelle Kafusi. So there was a lot of quick information in that. And now what I do is I'll turn it over to John Borgett, and he will go through those and put number values to them and dive deep. And then we'll open up for any questions or concerns you have, any clarifications that you might need. We're here for you. And Wayne is ready to answer as well. So John, I'll turn the time over to you.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Kafusi and Honorable Council. It's a pleasure for me to have the opportunity to kind of walk through a document. I would like to say a couple things before I start. First of all, the mayor mentioned, but I would like to give a special thanks to David Mortensen, our budget officer, and Kelsey Zarbach, who's also in our budget office. Those two have been putting a lot of hours and assisted me in getting the budget put together. I want to tell you a little bit about this document, the budget highlights. It's on page 19 of the budget book. Something else that we've done for the last several years is we also list it separately on our website. So if people want to kind of get if they want to get a feel for what's in the budget, what's not in the budget, and get kind of a flavor, this is a 6-page document that really gives a good overview and hits all of the significant things that impact the budget. And so I think this is helpful, and I'm going to kind of walk through sections of it right now. I would also mention that our plan and intent is to have the budget book as well as this budget highlights document posted on the provo.org website. If you go into the finance department, and then you go into reports, and then there's budget documents, and there you can pull up we're calling it the proposed tentative budget, because it will not be adopted as a tentative budget for 2 weeks. And then we also have the highlights there. With that, I want to just go through, and it's all important, but I've highlighted some sections that I want to just discuss with you that I feel like are significant, so that we don't take the time and read it all word for word. But I would encourage each of the council members and to residents and those interested that they take the time to go through and review this. It's a real good introduction to the budget. I'm going to start off with this. I'm just going to touch on the areas that are highlighted. And in the second paragraph, it just mentioned this budget is a result of many hours of contributions of council members, the public employees, and city leadership. With the economic impacts of COVID-19 being unknown, the administration has attempted to submit a budget that's conservative and utilizes fund balance to address critical needs of the city to protect the long-term goals and objectives. And so, yeah, there's a lot of challenges. One of the things is that we've been working on this budget is not only focus on short-term needs and the abilities to pay our bills and be open from day to day, but also to think about consequences of long-term needs as well. And so those things have been addressed. In the next highlighted section, it says, as evidenced in Provo and the nation, there are many signs that the local and national economies are dropping due to the impacts of COVID-19. The city is currently cautious about sales tax revenues, anticipates that they will drop 5% from current trends prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is a hard number to estimate. It kind of depends on who you talk to. I would mention that we, as early as I believe it's the 10th or 11th of this month in May, that we will get the report, an early estimate on the reports for March. We're anxious to see how March is impacted, because that's the first month where we've really started to see significant impacts from the pandemic. And when we get that information, we will share that with the council, because at that time the budget will be in your hands as of today. And so we want to work together, and we're going to need to be, and we talked about it a little bit later, and the mayor mentioned it, one of the things that we're going to need to make sure we are is that we're nimble and realize that this budget isn't just done. It's going to be a process that we're going to have to work with and monitor and adjust going forward, just because of the uncertainty of the environment and the economic situation that we're in right now. If you go down to the next section that's highlighted, it says, while preparing the 2021 budget, directors were asked to be surgical, as the mayor mentioned, and evaluate their budgets and look for possible savings and offset the impact of decreased revenues. All of the unfilled positions were evaluated, and some positions were identified to not fund in fiscal 2021 budget due to the anticipated revenue shortfalls. As the mayor mentioned, the directors and the general fund were also asked to review their budgets and identify budget reductions that equal 1.5% of their budget. We switch to the next page. It mentions that monies were invested in capital improvements, vehicle replacement, and employees as part of this budget. Provo's employees are among the greatest and most critical assets the city has, and by investing in them, we are better able to recruit, develop, and retain top employees. And I remember I was in my same role back in the Great Recession, and I was working closely with Mayor Curtis, and there were 2 years where we did not provide. We basically had wage freezes for those 2 years, and it was difficult, and there were challenges associated with it. And I remember Mayor Curtis at the time saying that he really wished that we hadn't had to do that, because it just created some long-term challenges for the city. And so one of the goals and the hopes in this budget was to be able to weather the storm during this year and be able to continue to provide benefits to the employees that will help us long term. As part of the budget, in the middle of the page, there are some utility rate increases. These have been part of a long-term plan for the city as we've been working with Public Works in our wastewater fund. As we prepare and start construction for a reclamation plant, there is a 25% increase or $13.77 monthly increase for the residential home. And there's also a 5% increase for the water fund, or an average of $2.28. As far as funded personnel costs, included, there's a 2.5% merit increase. There's career service advancements. There's a health insurance cost increase of 3.8%. And what we do is we use a national index called the Millman Index, and we adjust the amount that goes into the medical spending account that employees can then purchase which packages they want through a cafeteria style for their medical, dental, and other employment benefits. The state legislature met this past year, and the governor signed a bill that offered enhancements to the public safety Tier 2 employee retirement benefit systems. And we have included $183,000 in funding for that to provide that benefit to our police and fire employees. There's also money budgeted for employee appreciation. We also have our new birth and parent and adoption leave program, and then we have several benefits that went along with federal guidelines for COVID-19 leave benefits that have been implemented throughout the city. We had a number of supplemental requests, as we normally do as part of this budget process. There were 42 that totaled $3.3 million. This is a challenge because it would have been real tempting and easy to just say, well, we're not even going to consider supplemental requests in such a difficult year, but we felt like it was important that we evaluate them and look at them and determine if some of them should be funded and other things not funded. And of those, we've included $406,000 that were recommended to be funded. And I'm just going to list those. In public safety, we were approached by the Provo City School District they would provide 50% funding for a new officer in their school resource program. And so we felt like this was an opportunity that really would benefit both the city and the school district, and it was kind of a unique opportunity to where we would only have to pay half for this year as well as future years, and so we're recommending that. In our fire department, there's some new technology that provides firemen and the ambulances to monitor, have a cardio monitoring system that includes auto pulse acquisition. And Chief Miguel's explained it to me. It's a great benefit. They had $40,000 in their equipment replacement fund already part of the budget. This $11,000 would give them the needed funding to provide these on the ambulances, which would provide a huge benefit and save lives in the future. As Mayor mentioned, we have included $150,000 for professional services for updating the general plan. In Parks and Recreation, we have $15,000 for needed ADA improvements. They actually submitted 50, but due to tightness of funds, we are recommending 15. And they've recently completed a study which has went out and looked at different areas of the city to look at areas that need additional enhancements to provide ADA access. And so this would give them a good start, at least working on the most critical areas that were identified. In the Recreation Center, they are proposing $100,000 to increase child watch services. There's been a big need over the last year that they've seen. This is a revenue neutral recommendation because they would charge for those services and that they would have revenue to offset the increased cost. I did talk to Scott about this, and if for some reason COVID-19 were to extend and child care services continue to be limited, that they would not spend the additional budget here and it would still be a net zero. But they wanted to have the flexibility to provide this because it's been a real need. In the airport, we're recommending a new security specialist position. Currently, we have someone that's sharing duties, and they're 1 minute they're maintenance, the next minute they're security, and they're wearing multiple hats. Well, as we have looked at our new terminal, and as we're having additional scheduled service flights, the FAA has come in and done some inspections, and they have strongly recommended or feel like it's a requirement that we need to have a full-time security specialist that can help provide the security needs there, and so that's what we're recommending. So those are the supplemental requests. I wanted to talk a little bit about significant capital expenditures. This year's budget, and it's in the budget document, but the recommended budget that the council consider for approval later in June, is $292,939,096. This is up significantly from last year. Last year, our budget was $253,940,236. But there's a significant reason for that, and it's these two items listed as significant capital expenditures. Included in this budget is the airport terminal for $34,300,000. I would mention for the council and for the public that's watching this meeting that almost all of the sources for this funding come from external sources. As you remember, we received $9 million from the state. The county has made some commitments. We're working through Mountain Land Association of Governments that's going to provide some funding. So there are a number of sources that are providing this opportunity and so that's included in our $292 million. Also, the plan is for this year in fiscal 2021 to start the construction of the water reclamation plant. This will be a multi-year project, and this is just a portion, but that is planned to start. And so if you list those two, that's roughly $50 million. And so if you backed off the $50 million from the $292 million, it's actually less than last year. But I thought it was important that we touch on and see what made it go up this year. We go to the next page. One of the things that's always tempting, and some things as you kind of try to balance the budget in a difficult year like this, is to offset something such as vehicle replacements. I remember when I was here back in the Great Recession, we went a couple of years without any vehicle replacements, and our city fleet was in very bad shape as far as putting maintenance in, as far as being able to rely on vehicles. And this past year, our city fleet committee came in and did a study, and they came back with a recommendation for funding vehicle replacements, and it was actually up from what it was the prior year. But because of the importance of vehicles and of keeping on top from a long-term perspective, we feel like this is something that we include in the budget, so it is included. Down towards the bottom third of the page, the mayor mentioned this. The city has implemented a soft hiring freeze requiring the mayor's approval for vacant positions to be filled. The city plans to set aside savings from unfilled positions to offset potential for revenue shortfalls from the impact of COVID-19. The administration plans to monitor revenue very closely and make budget adjustments timely to account for revenue variations. And so, and I think that's good either way. I mean, if our revenues are trending down, we need to make sure that we have money set aside. If we see that things are recovering or things that are improving, we need to be able to respond both ways. I want to talk a little bit about items that are not included in the budget. The first one the mayor mentioned was the sick pay buyout. Typically, employees accrue 96 hours a year. And what we've done for a number of years is we've bought employees out half of that balance of unused sick leave. So if they had any sick days that they reported during the year, they would be offset by that. But that's been done in November. And the reason and the purpose behind it was to encourage employees to come to work and not abuse sick leave policies. But our sense and feeling is that for this year and in these times of limited resources, it's not been funded. Also, as was mentioned by the mayor, each year the city has completed a market study to evaluate pay grades for all employees at the city. With the uncertainty of COVID-19 and the many layoffs experienced by closed facilities and businesses, it was determined that the market would be very difficult to evaluate in these turbulent conditions. Consequently, there are not any market adjustments to pay grades in the 2021 budget. The next area that I want to just talk a little bit about, and these two items we're going to talk about next were very difficult and things that we don't like to do, but just felt like we needed to, and I'll be able to explain why. I think as most of the council members are aware, we created about 6 years ago a plan we had our new rec center. We wanted it to stay nice. We wanted to be able to maintain the equipment. We wanted it to be a great experience for residents. And so what we did is we established what we call our Equipment and Systems Replacement Fund. Did an analysis, determined how much we would need to set aside each year, which was $413,000. And we started setting that aside. We included in the plan was if there were savings, or if they, for that year, they didn't use all that, then it would carry over, and it would be a building or an accumulating fund that would be there to maintain the facility. Currently in the rec center, they've been utilizing that. They've been replacing different systems and doing things, and it's worked well for them. But currently, right now, there's a balance of $400,000 in that account. And the amount that we've been setting aside each year is $413,000, as I mentioned. So in the proposed budget, we are proposing not to add another $413,000 to that balance. In theory, if it goes as it's gone in the past, they should be okay. They may run out towards the end of the year, but pretty close to what's there. But then in the subsequent year, we're hoping that things would be better, and we could put this back in place and start providing that again. Now, we also have done something similarly for all other general fund facilities. And in their situation, we haven't utilized or needed to use the funds as much. And so we currently have in our other general fund facilities $1.3 million in the account. In the initial years, we were actually putting $395,000, but last year we dropped it to $237,000 because we didn't feel like we needed to add additional funds for the city center, since we were going to raise it and we were going to build a new building. And so we just went with the $237,000, and then the intent was once our new building opened, we would determine what would need to be set aside and start setting aside money for that as well. And so anyway, so in both of these areas, we are recommending that we not use what's accumulated or the prior balance, but that we don't set aside new funds in those two areas, with the hope that we have adequate money that's set aside that's been accumulated priorly to take care of the upcoming year and provide the funding that's needed. Finally, for a brief summary at the bottom, I would just mention that we welcome and encourage your careful review of our recommended budget. We also welcome the input of residents and businesses as we proceed through the process of adopting the city's annual budget. As always, our staff is at your disposal to respond to questions and assist in any way the municipal council would like over the next several weeks. We believe you will find the budget responsive to your concerns and aspirations and forward-thinking as we plan together for the future of the Provo community. And with that, myself or the mayor or Wayne, we're happy to answer any questions, but that provides you just a little bit of an overview for this year's budget that we're delivering to the council.
Thank you, Mr. Borgett. And Mayor, we're so grateful to you and your staff for all of the hours of work and sleepless nights that you've invested in this. And we know that we've had some very productive and beneficial conversations leading up to this presentation of the preliminary budget. And we're confident that we'll be able to get through this next phase and be successful. So thank you very much to you and all of your staff for this great work. And I wanted to just clarify for the public that the council will hold a work meeting next week on Tuesday, May 12th at 12 p.m. to begin the council's review of the budget. And then we will consider a motion the following week at the May 19th regular council meeting to tentatively adopt the budget. Then the general public will be able to share their comments about the budget at public hearings to be held on June 2nd and June 16th of this fiscal year. Final adoption of the budget would be anticipated on June 16th 2020. Anyway, I just wanted to make sure the public understood process that we're going to be moving toward at this point. Mr. Harding, would you like to make a comment?
Thank you, Chair. I just had a quick question on, we talked about the rainy day fund, and it's raining outside. I was curious, just what's the rough hit that we're going to take to our rainy day fund? So
the exact number we're at right now is $811,051. So the first day, which was weeks ago, I wrote on the whiteboard the number 1 million, and our whole goal was to stay below that. And I'm just so pleased that John was able to figure that out. So we're right around a little over 800,000. Again, I two things I stated when we started this process. I said I don't want this to come out on the backs of our employees, because it's not their fault we had a pandemic. And then the other one I wrote on the whiteboard was protect our full-time employees. And those were kind of my two reasons for dipping into the rainy day fund.
Great, thank you. And by the way, good work on everyone who's been a part of this. This is really better than I had hoped to see. With that said, I am a little uncomfortable with not putting that money in to those funds that we do generally every year. You know, I see those as just kind of paying for the services that we're currently using. But you know, there was going to be a painful decision, you know, one way or another, and that may be one of the least painful. But I do hope that's on the list of one of the first things that we'll fund if we do have increased revenues, and that we have the discipline to add those contributions. And that was already said, but just wanted to voice my support for returning those funds as soon as we can.
We have a great track record, and like I stated earlier, just since I've been mayor, we've been able to push it to a 24% increase. So we're going to get there.
All right. Well, thank you, Mayor, and thank you again, Mr. Borgett, and to all your staff for all of your wonderful work on this. And I'm sure we'll have some productive conversations coming up next week about the budget. So we'll move on now to a second presentation. This is to be given by Mr. David Walter, our redevelopment director, on the merits of a small business loan program. Go ahead, Mr. Walter.
Council Chair and members of the council, good evening. Thank you again. So this item is the first steps towards the creation of an emergency loan program. As we looked out and saw what was happening in the economy nationwide and worldwide with the COVID virus, we knew that there were problems that were going to be cropping up here locally as well. And we thought we could come up with a way to provide funding to help address part of that. Next slide, please. So as we looked at this, our economic development is really more than just trying to recruit new businesses to come into Provo. We do really want to see our local businesses survive, to succeed, and to actually grow and thrive here in Provo. And the concept of economic gardening allows us to get as much or more of a return from helping businesses to grow here locally than bringing in a new player to potentially compete on that stage. Next slide, please. So as you know, the redevelopment agency is funded by tax increment, which is the difference between the taxes that generate. Okay. Thank you. The difference is that the taxes in a project area, when they go up, the agency captures a portion of it. This slide shows the existing project areas that Provo has with the addition of two projects, the one for the mix and one for the medical school housing. Now, under state law, the agency is normally constrained to expend its funds that it generates through tax increment within these project areas. However, next slide, please. The legislature the code that created the redevelopment agencies rather, does include a provision that the agency is able to make benefit findings that would allow it to expend these tax increment funds outside of a redevelopment project area. So the agency has to make a benefit finding that spending these funds outside the project area is a benefit to the project area, and that's that code section that's at the bottom of the screen. Next slide, please. So with that in mind, I looked at the fund balance for the tax increment fund, and we do have a fund balance. We can take $500,000 and appropriate that and make it available for an emergency loan program. Next slide, please. Here are some broad parameters for a loan program. So our minimum loan amount would be $5,000. Our maximum would be $20,000. And based on our conversation earlier this afternoon, we did go back and run a few numbers. So we settled on a interest rate of 2.75%, which is roughly 50 basis points less than the current private lending rate. So based on that, for a $20,000 loan at 2.75% interest over a 10-year period, the scheduled payment would be $190 every month. For a $5,000 loan, that amount drops to $47.71. So the idea of this would allow us to create a loan program. There would be a nominal interest rate. It would be below the market rate. It would still be, it would give the businesses the opportunity to apply for it. The smaller amounts typically would go, we are crafting this with an eye towards the smaller businesses within our community. And the reason we thought that this was appropriate is that we do have a significant number of businesses that are not within a redevelopment project area. And that way we aren't inadvertently excluding them by creating this program through the redevelopment tax increment funds. So with council's direction, we will go ahead and craft that. Tonight's item is a presentation only. It does not include the appropriation language that would appropriate the $500,000 out of the agency fund balance. That item needs to be noticed for a 10-day period. So we would take that step and bring this item back to you for the next meeting to get the appropriation and to formally create the loan program. I think that's the end of the presentation. So if you have any questions, we're more than happy to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Walter. Any questions for Mr. Walter? All right. Well, we heard this, we had a good discussion about this earlier in our afternoon work session. So we look forward to the next step, and we're appreciative of your efforts, and we'll be collaborating soon. All right.
Thank you.
Mr. Strachan, if you wouldn't mind providing our public comment preamble.
My pleasure. As explained by the chair earlier in the meeting, the municipal council meeting is being held online. This necessitates certain changes in procedure for those members of the community who wish to make public comment during the public comment period or wish to be heard during public hearings for those items requiring public hearings. Those items are numbered 3 through 6 of tonight's agenda. To receive public comments where designated, we have enabled telephone access. I will share the instructions now, and they will be shown on screen during the public comment portions of the meeting. There are several numbers available to call. These can be found on the YouTube page where the meeting is being broadcast and at provocitycouncil.com. When a caller is connected, they will be required to enter the meeting ID, which is the listed webinar ID, and enter the pound symbol. The phone system will then ask for a personal ID number. Simply enter pound at this point. The caller will now enter the meeting as an attendee and will be able to hear the meeting and will be muted. If a caller wishes to speak on the item being discussed, they can press star nine once to indicate their desire to comment and then wait to be called upon. Callers will be called upon by the last 4 digits of the listed phone number. Each will then be asked to provide their name and city of residence before making their comments. Each will be given up to 2 minutes to speak. A timer will be posted on screen and a beep should be audible to the caller when their time is up. For items requiring a public hearing, time to comment will be provided for all those who wish to speak. For items that do not require a public hearing, public comment will still be taken following presentation of the item, but will be limited to 15 minutes total. Now, as is the council's tradition, 15 minutes have also been set aside for an open public comment period, which is intended to allow comment on matters that do not appear on the agenda. That time starts now.
Thank you, Mr. Strachan. Because of a delay on the live broadcast, we'll pause here for about a minute to make sure that there are everyone has an opportunity. At present, I don't see anybody on the list of participants who are citizens. Well, since
Mr. Hanley, that's about 40 something seconds, but maybe give him a minute and a half today because that public comment thing just went up.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I seem to recall that in the last meeting, in one of our earlier meetings, we had a similar delay on the public comment period.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a minute. Let's give another 30 seconds.
Okay.
All right, that's been a minute and a half and we still don't have anybody on the call list.
Okay, well, we'll move on then to an approval of the following minutes: April 21st, 2020 council meeting minutes. Are there any objections or requested changes to those minutes? Okay, seeing none, I declare the minutes approved by unanimous consent. We'll now go to item number 3, which is a public hearing on a resolution approving the 2020-2024 Consolidated Plan and funding recommendations to the first year action plan. This will be presented by Dan Gonzalez, our CDBG and Home Administrator.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, and hopefully the sound comes better than this afternoon.
Yes, it sounds good.
Very good. Okay. So the Provo City receives allocations from the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development to fund 2 programs: the Community Development Block Grant and the Home Investment Partnerships Program. The city qualifies, as I mentioned, as an entitlement jurisdiction through a formula to receive this funding. In order to receive the funding, entitlement cities are required to provide to HUD a 5-year consolidated plan that will delineate the strategy to use the funds. The plan includes community needs assessment and a housing market analysis. And based on those, a strategy plan is developed, focusing on specific needs and priorities. The Consolidated Plan includes in the first year, the 2020, the first annual action plan, indicating specifically what projects or activities will be carried out within the two programs. For the year, for program year 2020, the allocation for CDBG funding is listed there with additional program income and prior year funding to a total of $2,019,511. For the home program, as the city is partner with other consortium members, the allocation to the whole consortium is $1,409,127. With the addition of program income and some finished projects, the total amount will be $2,410,253. This is in a continuation to collaborate regionally with the other entitlement cities. We will be supporting two capital projects for public service agencies. The first one is to United Way in rehabilitating the community services building. Total project of $200,111, of which Provo will participate with $94,918. And the second project is a receiving center for Wasatch Mental Health. Total $250,557, and Provo just under $90,000 contribution. We also join with these other CDBG entitlements, which are the Seat of Orem and Utah County, funding public services, which we're allowed to cover up to 15% of the allocated portion for the year. The chart here illustrates all the agencies that apply for funding, what if they received any last year, their requests, and how the funding will be allocated by each of the jurisdictions. The percentage of funding allocated for both capital projects and for the service agencies is based on the expected number of beneficiaries for each of the jurisdictions. So this changes from year to year based on the application and the target population and the number of eligible beneficiaries to be served. Sorry. My computer is acting up a bit. There we go. Okay. Skipping one. Okay. Sorry about that. So for the allocation the Provo City receives for CDBG funding, we're allowed to get 20% of the funding for administration, and we're also providing some program delivery for programs run by the division. Subtracting those amounts and the amount dedicated for public services, the total available for capital projects is $1,520,000. And the chart lists the projects that were submitted for funding and the recommendations. I will note that the bottom item on the capital projects is a request that came outside of the normal process by the Director of Community and Neighborhood Services, supported by the Administrative Services Director, to fund one code enforcement officer for the fiscal year, which is an eligible use of CDBG funding, but because of the nature of the service, is not included. It doesn't have to count as part of the administration costs. This chart illustrates just the Provo funding recommendations for the different public service agencies. In addition to what the other charts did not have, it lists funds available still for some of those organizations. Organizations draw quarterly on their funding available. So the numbers shown here on balances from prior program years are for that last quarter that they haven't drawn yet. So there's a 99% likelihood that all those funds will be exhausted by the end of the fiscal year. Finally, the home consortium recommendations are listed here, taking the allowed 10% for the administration of the home program and indicating separately the $211,369 that must be allocated. It's a 15% of the total of the entitlement to a community housing development organization, or a CHODO. These $211,000 are added to the request from NeighborWorks Provo to construct a rental senior housing project in Orem. And so their request is fulfilled at the full level of $400,000 with that taken in mind. A couple of things to note is for several years now, rural housing development or self-help program has been funded every year. Currently, they have a project in a little over $2 million that they will be drawing shortly, but that they still have available. And the committee evaluating this looked at that and the proposal from Utah Regional Housing, which is a nonprofit for Provo City Housing Authority, to construct a rental project at 85 North and Center in Provo, and felt that the funds would benefit better in the construction of the rental project, fulfilling almost to the total request for that project. This is less than 2% of the total cost of the project, but it was a gap identified by the organization and the reason why they requested home funds. Earlier today, there was a question or an inquiry as to how the committees, who was representing Provo in the committees. And just want to come back to that and let you know. We have 3 committees. Boy. The first committee is the Regional Collaborative Joint Committee for CDBG Funds. And representing Provo were Sarah Acey, Carterville Neighborhood Chair, James Stewart, Franklin Neighborhood Vice Chair, Saraya Hillam, Mazer Neighborhood Vice Chair. For the Provo City CDBG Committee, the members included Mary Miller, Spring Creek Neighborhood Chair, Ruth Eldridge Thomas, Foothills Neighborhood Chair, Sandy Oding, Joaquin Neighborhood Vice Chair, Joey Burton, Wasatch Neighborhood Vice Chair, Eric Chase, North Park Neighborhood Chair, John Borgett, Administrative Services of Provo City Director, Karen McCandles, Community Action Services and Food Bank Executive Director, and Brad Bishop, Self-Help Homes Executive Director. Representing Provo in the Utah Valley Home Consortium Advisory Board was Jonathan Ka'u, who works at BYU. Side note, he is also a member of the Provo City Housing Authority Board. There was also an inquiry to identify the location of the Carson Townhomes project, which is funded, recommended to be funded with CDBG capital projects. And that is located at 33 and 37 East 400 South. That is my presentation. Ready to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. We've got time now for public comment, if there's anybody from the public who would like to ask any or make any comments. Do we need to wait? How long do we need to wait, Mr. Strachan?
About 30 seconds. There is one caller listed there, but that caller has not indicated an interest in speaking, so they may be listening to something else. But give it 30 seconds or so.
Okay. All right, we'll bring this item back then to the council for any council discussion or any further questions for Mr. Gonzalez. We, again, discussed this earlier in our work session, but any further questions from, yes, Mr. Harding.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Gonzalez, great presentation again. Let me ask, or make kind of share one thought of kind of a personal preference as we work on these, not necessarily this year, but going forward in future years, as well as, you know, maybe you can help me understand where this current proposal kind of falls on this spectrum. But years past, we've talked about how much of the affordable housing in the county is currently located in Provo, and we had identified one, you know, a kind of a need or a desire to try to encourage other communities to kind of pick up more of their share and take a bigger share of the affordable housing throughout the county, because of the way all of these things are structured. Provo is kind of a lead entity for federal monies that are allocated to various jurisdictions. And I think at least the past couple of years, most of the money that has come both to Provo as well as the other communities have been directed more to the other communities, I think in part to try to help spread out some of the affordable housing. Just as we've worked on this and as we've put together particularly the Community Land Trust, that seems to me like a really good vehicle for investment of this money to directly benefit the residents of Provo. And so, you know, that's just an example, but a good example of where, you know, we could make sure that the money that's being allocated to Provo stays in Provo and directly benefits. So I was curious, do you feel, you know, roughly, are the monies that are being allocated to Provo generally being allocated or being designated to be used in Provo, or are they still some of that maybe more focused on other parts of the county?
Is your question related to the recommendations for funding for this coming year, or overall?
So yeah, sorry, that was a bit. I covered a lot. Part of it was just a preference that for the future that we consider, you know, investing in things like the Community Land Trust within Provo, so that we're using all of the money that was allocated to us. But I would like you to just kind of give us an idea. You know, it doesn't have to be down to the last dollar or whatever, but generally the money that's being allocated to Provo, you know, but as part of the larger consortium, but is it going to be spent in Provo for this current year's plan?
The answer to that question, and regarding to this current year recommendations, yes. For home funds, the portion that Provo would receive is about 47% of the total. So less than $1.2 million. And so sorry. So the allocation is 1.4. Provo would be receiving only about $800,000 or so. 1 million and change is what's been allocated to the project for Utah Regional Housing, which is in Provo. And so for this year, there's more than the allocation that Provo will have received that will stay in Provo.
Thank you.
Okay, any other discussion of this item? This is the first of 2 public hearings that this item will have. The next one will be scheduled for May 19th. Any further comments or questions? Yes, Ms. Ellsworth.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. I was curious about the appointments, the people who serve on these committees. How are they appointed, and how do other cities make these decisions or form these working groups?
Okay. For Provo City, the makeup of the committees is delineated in the citizen participation plan. I didn't provide a copy of that for this meeting, but I can make it available to you and make it ready for you for next time. It delineates that for the CDBG committees to recruit neighborhood chairs or vice chairs as may be available to be part of the committee. The consortium, there's a separate agreement, there's a 3-year agreement that we entered into, and that specifies that how many members of each of the jurisdictions will be part of the board that will be making the recommendations. I can also make that available to you. That's how Provo City does it. Other cities, including here in the county, do it a little different. Some of them create a commission and have stipulated serving timeframes from anywhere from 2 to 3 years and rotated. And there's variations on that from other jurisdictions, as I know. That's how Provo City has been doing it. It's part of the citizen participation plan. I hope that answers the question. I should say, as we are in the process of the purpose of the hearing today is approving or adopting the consolidated plan. The citizen participation plan is an attachment to that. And if there are any changes or modifications that are desired, this would be the time to do it.
Thank you.
Mr. Harding.
Thank you. So this is my 5th time of reviewing these proposals, but the first time that I've been able to review the 5-year consolidated plan. I think you've done a great presentation on this year's proposal. I think, though, that the council should spend some time on the 5-year plan. I think that's at a fairly high-level policy perspective, and I think that's probably one of the most important things for us to make sure that the vision contained in that consolidated plan matches our vision for the community.
That's good advice and a good reminder, Mr. Harding. So again, we'll be returning to this item on May 19th, so there will be time for that. Assuming there are no more comments from the council, we thank you, Mr. Gonzalez, for your time and your preparation and your presentation today, and we'll look forward to talking some more.
Thank you.
We'll move on to an implied
Okay,
motion.
they're on my thing now.
Item number 4, which is an ordinance amending Provo City Code relating to parking lot landscaping, and this has citywide application, and this will be presented by Austin Taylor, our parking and sustainability coordinator.
Thanks, Chair Hanley. John, am I going to have the clicking access, or should I tell you to click?
I'll give it to you if you want it.
Okay, I'll take it. Okay, got it. Okay, thanks, council members, for hearing this item. So this changes the code for parking lot landscaping. It's applicable throughout the city, and it's applicable for all new developments. Okay, so this is a map of average temperatures from 2017 to 2018. And if you look closely, you can see hotter areas are areas with more pavement. So the airport is really hot, the mall in East Bay is really hot, the hospital is very hot. And as the sun hits this, it heats up all the area around it. And it, as global warming comes and as temperatures rise, this is just going to get worse. And so what this proposal seeks to do is get more tree canopy over these hot parking lots. The current code is a little bit confusing and also is pretty weak as far as tree requirements go. So when a developer comes in, for the landscaping, they have to look, and it says you have to have 40 square feet of landscaping per stall, and then 6% of your interior portion has to be landscaped. And then for every 120 square feet of landscaping, you have to have 1 tree. So it takes a little bit to understand that. It's a little bit unclear. And then there are only 2 shapes of landscaped areas that you can use. So it's a bit restrictive. And it only requires 25% tree canopy, which is, again, pretty low. And this is what it's producing. This is the new Vanderhall Motors parking lot. So if you look closely, you can see trees, but they're pretty small. That's going to reach about 25% tree canopy in 20 years or so. But it could be a lot better. And our general plan asks us that we should establish higher minimum landscaping and tree density requirements for all development. So that's what this code does. Here's what the proposed code would change. It would increase the tree canopy coverage from 25% to 50%, which doubles it. And that's within 20 years of planting. It makes it super clear for a developer to know how many trees they need to plant. It says 1 tree per 4 parking spaces instead of this number of trees per square feet of landscaping. It gives some guidance. It specifies 19 trees that our city forester has shown to work well in parking lots in Provo. And so they'll grow well. They shouldn't die as long as they're taken care of. It reduces the required amount of plant coverage for ground cover from 50% to 25%. So that allows for xeriscaping on the ground of the landscaping. It requires that when the rainwater hits the parking lot, that there be drainage inlets in the curbing, or they could allow parking stops which have a hollow base to them so the water can flow through from the parking lot into the landscaping. It requires that the landscaping be concave so the water flows again into the landscaping. It adds another option for landscaping shapes. It's this third one on the right, the diamond shape. And that you can fit the most amount of parking spaces per land area with that one. And then this last thing comes from the Public Works Stormwater Department. There are some areas of the city where they don't recommend infiltration of stormwater because that's where we draw our culinary water from. And so in those areas where they won't allow infiltration, they can swap out trees for landscaped area. This is the code. We can come back to that. I'm going to show you really quickly all the trees that are allowed. Honey locust, English hawthorn, golden rain tree, chokecherry, Zelkovas, elms, little leaf linden, silver linden, European beech, tricolor beech, common hackberry, mountain ash, and then a variety of elms. And these are all suggested to us by both our city forester and then Austin Corey, who used to work for Provo City, and he's a landscape architect. This is an example from Salt Lake City. It's a public parking lot that has 50% tree canopy. And I counted the ratio of trees to parking spaces, and this is at 1 tree per 4 parking spaces, just like I'm proposing. So that's what we're going for. This is what it looks like from the ground level. I call it a parking forest. This is the second lot that they have. It's a huge full block, and again, to mitigate urban heat island, they planted a ton of trees in it. And that's what it looks like on the ground. There's a similar example, OC Tanner in Salt Lake City. They have very good parking lot landscaping. They have low water grass. They have lots of trees. This is one of the best examples in Provo. It's not as great as the ones that I showed you, but BYU Museum of Art, they've already started using those landscape diamonds, and they work well. And this probably has the most tree canopy coverage of any parking lot in Provo. So it shows that it can work. Here's an example of desertscaping or xeriscaping. More rocks, less grass, more native plants. This is the kind of thing that dropping the ground cover requirement from 50 to 25% would allow for. And here's just some proof that trees can get really big in Provo, and we can get lots of shade from them. And some examples from outside of Provo. This is a horse racetrack parking lot with a lot of good shade in it. So that's my presentation. I'm open for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Yes, Ms. Ellsworth.
It's not a question, it's a comment, so I'll wait. Well, no, I do have a question, sorry. In your trees, did you add any maples in there? Are there any maples?
No, there are no maples in there. I don't know specifically why, but apparently Chaz doesn't think they would work well in parking lots here.
Okay.
I told him to give me as many trees as possible because we want to allow for flexibility, and that's what we got.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Taylor, I had a question from a citizen about water use and whether or not this would impact or put at any kind of risk our efforts to try to conserve water if we're planting more plants. I gave an answer to that, but I'm curious what you would add to that.
So this actually has the potential to decrease water use because currently there's required curbing around all parking lot landscaping. And what that concrete curbing does is when the rain hits the parking lot, it hits the curbing and then it goes into pipes instead. It doesn't go into the landscaping. And so this change would make it so that there's inlets in the curbing, or people can use parking stops instead of curbing, which is a lot cheaper. And as the water hits the parking lot, it would run into the landscaping and water the landscape from there. So if it's done right, they might have to water the plants less even. And also dropping the ground cover requirement from 50 to 25% means that people can use far less grass or shrubs.
Excellent. All right, thank you very much. Any other questions for Austin before we open it up for any public comment? I have one call-in listener, but they may be waiting for a later item on the agenda. I don't know. While we're waiting, I'm just going to put in my vote for English hawthorn and tricolor beech, but I like those. I have a neighbor across the street who has a hawthorn like that, and they're just beautiful when they bloom. Really, really beautiful trees. All right. Well, we'll move on then. If there's no further questions, or does any member of the council desire to consider this item again at the next council meeting, since this is the first time that this has been heard? Okay, let's see. Ms. Ellsworth.
Yeah, I'm not requesting to have it continued. I just had a comment on it. If you're taking comments. I just appreciate the work that Austin's done on this. I was an intern at Provo City, and I worked on almost the exact same project. And so it's exciting to me to see that this is moving forward. And I appreciate the selection of large trees that have been found. It seems like in most park strips and parking lots, we're finding a lot of small fruit trees. And I'm excited to see that there's more larger varieties that are being selected. So I think this is a phenomenal addition to our code.
Thanks, Councilor Ellsworth. I'll add one more thing that the Planning Commission, when I brought it to the Planning Commission, originally the intent that we had was to eliminate the requirement for concrete curbing. There are a few streets in Provo that don't have concrete curbs. One is 100 South by New Skin, and that it's cheaper to build. It allows the water to directly flow into the landscaping. But the Planning Commission requested that we keep the curbing requirement because they were nervous that people would drive their cars into the landscaping. And so we made a compromise to allow for inlets in the curbing so the water can still flow in.
All right. Well, if there's no request to see this item again, then I will call, Mr. Harding.
Yeah, just a quick clarification. So you mentioned that you've got the cuts in the curbs, but earlier you said that it could be the I forget what they're called, the wheel stops or whatever. So is that what's written in here, that it can have the wheel stops as well?
Yeah, they could do either 6-inch concrete curbing with inlets or wheel stops, and the wheel stops are much less expensive and also get better water flow through them.
Great, thank you.
All right. So I will call then Mr. Hoban. Sorry, I'm
Yeah, no, I just Mr. Harding got me thinking. So Austin, when you showed that, I think it was a Rock Canyon trailhead, or it was one of the trailheads. Could we show that picture again? Of it was like a parking lot without any curbing. It had some rocks.
It's the wide trailhead.
Yeah, John, could you pull it?
Wow.
Yeah, so that's the parking lot at the Y trailhead. It doesn't have curbing. Yep.
Right. So I was just looking at that thinking we probably don't want most of our parking lots. I mean, aesthetically, I get why that's, at a trailhead, it makes sense. I'm wondering if aesthetically that's what we want, for most of our parking lots. I realize we have to have, you now require some sort of bumper or curbing with inlet. But even if we had bumpers there, I'm not sure if aesthetically that's what we're going for in Provo. I don't know. I'm just bringing that up as a consideration. If we had a lot of parking lots in Provo looking like that, I don't know. It might not be the right look we're going for in a lot of areas in Provo. But am I misunderstanding that with some sort of bumper could be used?
Yeah, that's correct. That could be used. And there is one already that does that. If you go to the Front Runner parking lot, the UTA Park and Ride, it's got like 700 parking spaces. They don't use concrete curbing around it. It's parking stops and rocks and trees. So it looks like that, but with parking stops.
All right. Well, I guess if nobody else has concerns, maybe it's maybe it's just me. I also will say thanks for all your effort on this, and I appreciate you trying to reduce the hot spots here in Provo, and also to get more water back down into our water table, because ultimately, you know, that's what the water we're going to be drinking years from now. So appreciate the effort. I mean, I'm okay with it. I just thought I'd bring that up as something to consider.
Thanks.
Ms. Ellsworth.
Yeah, just to Travis's concern, I don't think everyone's going to build it like this at Y Mountain. Another good example is what's called the multi-stake building on 9th East and about 3rd North. They've done some, they don't have a lot of trees, but they have done some filtration systems that allow water to run into the rocks and the dirt instead of down into the gutter. So I think that's a pretty good example there. And that's been around for like, what, 10 years or something?
Mr. Harding.
Just based on Mr. Taylor's comments, I pulled up Google Maps and I'm looking at the street view inside the parking lot at the UTA Intermodal Hub. And there are the wheel stops. There are I forget what they're called, but the strips of landscaping at the front of all the stalls in these rows. And I think it looks nice, and just flows into the rocks there. So I think that should be a look that is an option for developers.
All right. I will call for a vote on the implied motion. I'll begin with Mr. Harding. Oh, sorry, I'm supposed to do this in some sort of national order. Yes, I will start with Mr. Harding. I'll look at the list here. Go ahead, Mr. Harding.
Yes.
Ms. Ellsworth. Ms. Ellsworth, you're muted. Maybe she stepped away for a second. Mr. Fillmore.
Yes.
Mr. Hoban.
Yes.
Mr. Sewell.
Yes.
Mr. Shipley.
Yes.
Is Ms. Ellsworth back?
Yes.
Okay. And I will also vote yes, so that is unanimous. All right, thank you, Mr. Taylor, as always, for your good work. We'll move on to an implied motion on item number 5, which is an ordinance amending Provo City Code, updating development requirements of lands located within the special flood hazard area presented by Robert Mills, our Provo City planner. Go ahead, Mr. Mills.
Thank you, council members. Good evening. So this ordinance, Mike, is up on your board. The purpose of this is to actually update our floodplain ordinance requirements. So currently in our code, we actually have chapter 1433. And when this was initiated back in the late 80s, this ordinance was put in here as an actual floodplain zone. We wanted to, in working with Rob Hunter at Public Works and in working with our state floodplain coordinators, we kind of wanted to update our ordinance to be a little bit more congruent with what FEMA requires, and also to be easier to administer. So we suggested and we're proposing that rather than being a specific zone and chapter within the ordinance in chapter 14, we would like to amend chapter 15 or title 15 of the Provo City Code, which relates to sensitive lands, and actually put the floodplain management standards in that zone. And so we would completely eliminate chapter 1433 and add section 1505.180. So this new language actually incorporates a lot of the requirements of FEMA related to our special flood hazard area. And the second purpose of this update is to adopt the new Provo City flood insurance rate maps. For the past several years, FEMA and the state have been doing some mapping exercises related to floodplain areas within Utah County, and they have released the new firm maps specifically for Provo, and these will be effective on June 19th, 2020. So it's important for compliance and insurance things that we adopt those prior to that date. It's interesting to know, and council members and the public should be aware that there's continued mapping going on related to our floodplain, and so we'll expect to see additional maps in the future. But for right now, these were the ones that were updated for Provo City. One more item just to let the council members know. In the specific standards, there are development standards related to the floodway, but also related to development within 100 feet of the high point of the bank of the Provo River. And so these are development standards that we deal with often. That area is generally within the specified flood area, but can also extend beyond the special flood hazard area. And so one thing that we are proposing in, so John, in letter D, we have a requirement in our code that prohibits any structures or fill or parking lot from being created or constructed within 100 feet of that. However, we've received a lot of requests and reviewed a lot of plans that maybe have a sort of development specifically for like a single family dwelling that they own a lot along the river and they'd like to put in a house, and for some reason or another they need like 5 feet. We've consulted as staff and involved Public Works in this, and we felt that in certain circumstances that it would be fine to reduce that 100-foot requirement. It's not a FEMA requirement by any stretch of the imagination. It was actually put in the 80s as part of Flood Fight. And so we wanted to suggest that if it's a large project and they need a little bit, that it would be part of the project plan application to review and approve if allowed. And then if it's for like a single family residence or structure, that it would be part of a minor project plan. That's really the only substantive addition that we're proposing. Basically, the language is still the same, other than revised and updated definitions and things like that. So we took this to the Planning Commission. The first time there were some hesitations because Public Works they were working on some updates to the stormwater design standards. Those have taken place, and those have been adopted by the council. And so we wanted to bring this to you now, and the Planning Commission recommended approval, and that's my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Mills before we open it up for public comment? And just a note to the public, if you're listening and want to make a comment, you can go ahead and indicate. Mr. Shipley.
Yeah, just wonder if we could clarify for the sake of the public whether or not adoption of the new floodplain mapping will require some citizens of Provo to now have flood insurance that didn't need to have it before. That's happened in Springville, I know. And just wonder if this adoption is what triggers that, or if just the new FEMA, guidelines are what triggered that. It doesn't matter what Provo does.
So that's a great question. And with these specific maps, no one is being mapped into the special flood hazard area. The state and FEMA are actually currently studying the Provo River and its drainage and flood potential, as well as our levee system. There may be a potential that in the future, some residents' property would be mapped in, but not at this time.
Any other questions for Mr. Mills? All right, is there anyone from the public who wishes to ask a question? Half a minute here.
Still no hands up, but we'll see.
Okay, we'll bring it back to the council for any council discussion. Any further comments or questions from the council? All right. Does any council member desire to consider this item at the next council meeting, since this is the first time this item has been heard? Okay, then I will call for a vote on the implied motion. We'll start with, where's my list here? Okay, we'll start with Ms. Ellsworth.
Yes.
Mr. Fillmore. Mr. Fillmore, you might be muted.
Here we go again. Yes.
Mr. Hoban.
Yeah.
Mr. Sewell. Mr. Sewell. Mr. Sewell also muted? Yes. I can't unmute him for some reason. We'll come back to Mr. Sewell. Mr. Shipley.
Yes.
I will vote yes. Mr. Harding.
Yes.
Okay, do we have Mr. Sewell yet?
I'm not able to unmute him either. Mr. Sewell, if you're visible to the chair, can you kind of do a thumbs up or a thumbs down?
Not visible either. I don't have a video.
He may have slipped out by mistake.
Oh, there he is. Mr. Sewell.
I'm sorry, I had to step out for a second.
No problem. We're just voting on the implied motion regarding the special flood hazard area.
That's a yes.
Okay, so we've got a unanimous vote. Thank you. All right, we'll move on to an implied motion on item number 6, which is our last item on the agenda. An ordinance amending Provo City Code relating to permitted uses and yard requirements of the M1 light manufacturing zone citywide application. And again, we'll hear from Robert Mills, our Provo City Planner, but he will also be joined by Bill Pepperoni and Lynn Schofield, our Fire Marshal.
Okay, great, thank you. John, do you have the presentation that I sent you? There we go, perfect. So, council members, we talked about this earlier today, but just to quickly go over what this proposed amendment is doing. The proposal is to modify the M1 light manufacturing zone by adding the SLU code 5192 petroleum bulk. Sorry, your pictures are in my way. Just one second. There we go. Petroleum bulk stations and terminals only as to the sale of petroleum products listed in the International Fire Code as combustible liquid classifications class 2, 3A, 3B as permitted uses in the zone. It also adds that same SLU code, but with a little bit different language. petroleum bulk stations, and terminals for the sale of petroleum products in flammable classifications, Class 1A, 1B, and 1C of the International Fire Code as a conditional use in the M1 zone, and then there are specific conditions that are listed. One very, very important part of this proposed amendment is to remove SLU 4823. This is currently listed as a conditional use in the zone with no specified conditions. Natural or manufactured gas storage distribution points as a conditional use in the M1 zone. Instead, the proposed amendment stipulates that the use can only be accessory to a primary use in the zone and limits the tank to 500 gallons. So something, instead of like a major distribution center like Praxair might use or something like that, it would be relegated to something that you would see for propane filling stations like at an Ace Hardware or something like that. Also adds language to the yard requirements of the M1 zone to allow Development Services Director to modify the requirements if on a finding that it results in a more efficient use of the property and that no undue hardships are created. Next slide, please. So the overall purpose of this proposed amendment is to make an unideal situation safer by adding regulations for uses that are existing and will remain, specifically related to one of the properties within the M1 zone, which is Christensen Oil. Next slide, John. So just a little bit of history on Christensen Oil. In 1935, Utah Oil Company actually acquired the site and established a petroleum product distribution operation there. Owen Christensen started working there in the 40s and bought the operation in 1973. The site and operation were expanded and improved over time. However, the use, the petroleum product distribution remained the same. Currently, this specific use is considered a legal non-conforming use. It was legally established. It's no longer permitted as a permitted use in the zone, but is allowed to continue operation indefinitely. Next slide. This is an aerial view of the Christensen Oil site. 600 South is at the south end of the picture. The rail yards are a little bit farther south, in between 2nd and 3rd East. Next slide. These are just some photos of the site. I took these the morning of Planning Commission, which was April 22nd. Kind of in a view if you were starting on 3rd East going north, and then to 5th South going west. Next slide. And then continuing around the block back to 600 South. Next slide. So Councilmember Harding in our earlier meeting made a really important point that he wanted to see where the other M1 zones are in the city, because this is a citywide ordinance that applies to all the M1 areas. These two, you can see them there, M1, kind of the gray zones. This is 820 North, so the business park up there, and a small sliver extending down Independence Avenue. Next slide. And this is 11th West, down by the railroad tracks, and about 600 South, 500 South-ish. There's this area there. Next slide, please. This is 600 South, where Christensen Oil currently is, extending along 600 South, and then just west of the cemetery. Next slide. This is a small M1 piece down 11th South, right next to the railroad tracks again. And one more slide. And then this small M1 piece is along State Street, towards the southeast end of the city, kind of down by Mountain Vista Business Park. Next slide. So just to comment on those slides. So there were several areas of M1 zoning that were actually bordering and abutting residential areas. And so that's an important part to bring out that Councilmember Harding talked about today. So this is not just related to the Christensen oil site, but there are other areas of impact. These are just slides of the proposed ordinance that you've seen. Next slide, John. Next one. Next one. And last one. So today during our meeting, one of the questions that Councilmember Harding raised was whether this should be more specific to the Christensen oil site. As staff, we met together after the meeting earlier today. We talked about that, and we feel that that is an excellent suggestion and a good point. And so in light of that, we've actually proposed some additional language to these uses that would specifically limit it to the site where Christensen oil is currently located. So only on property east of 200 East, north of 600 South, west of 3rd East, and south of 5th South. We added that language to both sections of the code, the permitted use section and the conditional use section. So council members, I just wanted to reiterate that this is a situation that is not ideal given the different uses of the oil site next to residential uses. In their current operations, they can continue and intend to. This specific ordinance is an effort in conjunction with staff, neighbors in the area, Christensen Oil, and the fire department to hopefully make a situation better. We wanted to make sure that it could be regulated properly and that there would be good information on what is allowed and what is not. And so we came up with this language as a way to hopefully compromise and move forward in a way that's best for everybody. So with that, I think Mr. Schofield has some slides that he wanted to present and talk to you about, and then we'll take any questions.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Schofield.
Thank you. So next slide, please. This is just going to reinforce some of the history of Christensen Oil. So Christensen Oil was preceded by a company known as Utoko. And actually, Owen Christensen worked for Utoko for a period of time before he established Christensen Oil. And they actually started the bulk storage, according to the records that I have, in 1947. In 1954, Provo City classified that as an M1 property, light manufacturing. And then from 1954 till 1999, Christensen Oil continued to add both flammable liquid storage and combustible liquid storage, lubricating oils, up until 1999. Somewhere between 1954 and 1999, the M1 zones and permitted uses, I believe, changed. And so in 1999, when they were replacing some tanks, the city came in and issued a stop work order because they were, in the eyes of the city, expanding a non-conforming use. And they required a building permit, or the city asked them to get a conditional use permit, a building permit, and then there were some setback requirements that they didn't feel were being appropriately met. So Christensen Oil went to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission went along with the city as far as the building permit and the conditional use permit and the setback requirements. Christensen then appealed it to the Board of Adjustments, which also held that the city was correct in those assessments. And Christensen finally appealed it to the 4th District Court. John, you can go ahead a couple of slides. Actually go to the virtual tour, if you will. So in 2001, The 4th District Court ruled and found and reversed the ruling of the Board of Adjustment. And they held a couple of things that are kind of important. Number one, that Christensen Oil legally established themselves, or Utoka legally established themselves on that property back in 1947. Number two, that at that time, no building permit was required for the installation of tanks, only a fire department permit. And three, that Christensen Oil had property rights as well as those of the surrounding neighborhoods. And so it is, as I said today, a legal non-conforming use. Although I'll come back to that. So just to kind of just fly through just a second, we're going to walk in through the west side of Christensen Oil. We're actually going to go back into the yard. So this is the main office off of 200 South. Next slide, please. Going on over, there's a warehouse behind that main office. You have a tank of, I believe that's the antifreeze or the lubricating oil tank, and then their pump station to fill their tank wagons and their with flammable liquids. Next slide, please. That's the other tank, which is either antifreeze or lubricating oil. And then the tanks that you see on the right is their flammable liquids, gasoline, kerosene, methanol, things like that. Next slide, please. That's gasoline storage. On the right, what I'm trying to demonstrate on the right is that is a picture. If you look down towards the base of the tank, that's called a containment basin. By code, the containment basin has to be able to hold the contents of the largest tank in the containment field. One of the things that's kind of interesting when you're talking about fire code is fire code evolves over a period of time. So this tank containment basin was built a long time ago, and you can tell because the base is gravel, which is no longer allowed. Next slide, please. All right. On the left are some of your combustible liquids, your diesel fuel storage, and their containment basin. And then on the right is diesel exhaust fluid. This is a tank that was added in 2016. Without a building permit, we're working on that particular process. And again, there was still some confusion on that. But this is diesel exhaust fluid is 68% water and 32% urea. And notice that it's in a containment basin as well, even though it's not required to be. Next slide, please. That's a tanker on the left, as well as some of the plastic totes, portable temporary plastic tote storage. Those are mostly empty. On the right, you also see the plastic tote storage of lubricating oils. Next slide, please. That's their overflow and staging shed on the left. On the right is another warehouse with some more of the plastic totes of lubricating oils. Next slide, please. On the left are vertical lubricating oil tanks. On the right are the horizontal lubricating oil tanks. Next slide. On the left is a shed that's containing the packaged DEF or diesel exhaust fluid that you buy at like Pep Boys or AutoZone. On the right is their shop or their garage where they store some personal vehicles, forklifts, things like that. On the left is their drum storage. Next slide, please. On the left, Christensen Oil is allowed, as are a lot of businesses within the city, to have a accessory use liquid propane or a propane tank to fill the tanks for their forklifts, and so that's their propane tank, 500 gallons. On the right, you're looking at their racing fuel or high octane Lamborghini fuel station. Next slide, please. On the left is their filling station on 600 South that does a pretty brisk business. And then on the right is their service facility for their trailers and their trucks. Next slide, please. This is their yard, where they typically have several trucks in there at night. These trucks are empty. They come back to the yard empty. In the morning, they'll go up to North Salt Lake. They'll refill at the refineries and then transport gasoline down to their various customers or back to the farm to fill up the tanks they have in their tank farm. Next slide. So there's been a lot of misinformation around the Mazer neighborhood, and we wanted to clarify just a couple of things. Fire code issues. Now, one of the interesting things in 1999 during the hearings with the city, in both the Board of Adjustment and the Planning Commission and the court documents, there were no fire code violations noted at Christensen Oil at that time. I personally inspected Christensen Oil in October of last year. I've been back over a dozen times since then, and there are currently no fire code violations at Christensen Oil. So I want to make that really clear. They run a safe operation. They work very hard to stay in compliance. Next slide, please. Some of the issues that have been brought up. This is an issue that was brought up. Pallet storage too close to combustible or to their liquid tanks. And so this is back, this picture was taken last week. Those pallets, there's 73 of them, are an adequate distance away from both the gasoline, the diesel, and the DEF tanks. There's not a code violation there. From a fire safety point of view, there is a little bit of concern about the piping down at the bottom being unprotected. And so this morning, Christensen Oil placed jersey barriers, concrete jersey barriers along those pipes to protect them should they continue to store pallets there, waiting for them to be picked up. Next slide, please. Groundwater protection. The groundwater protection, they have, as we mentioned in the work session this afternoon, they have an oil water separator that is required by the Division of Water Quality and by our city public works. There are 3 grates that feed that, and it is in compliance with all of the requirements of the Provo City's Public Works Department, as well as the Utah Division of Water Quality. Christensen Oil has had one reportable groundwater contamination issue 20 years ago. That's been resolved and it's closed. Prior to the COVID-19, another complaint was registered against Christensen Oil, but based on the Division of Water Quality's experience with Christensen Oil, that complaint was given a very low priority for investigation and has not been investigated at this time. Next slide, please. So some setback things that we wanted to look at. This is the setbacks looking along the 300 east side looking south. These setbacks were the setbacks in question back in 2000. There are some setbacks that are pretty narrow there, but those have been adjudicated. And then the photograph on your right is looking to the west from the east side, again from the 300 east side. And those setbacks also meet their setback requirements. Next slide, please. Truck and trailer parking. Their parking requirements are all met. They're allowed to bring their trailers there when their trailers are being worked on and are empty of fuel. They're allowed to be outside of the yard of their shop. It's called a safe haven rule, and it's acceptable under the code. Next slide, please. All right, some of the other concerns in the neighborhood that we talked about, we wanted to help resolve as we were working through this process with our work group. Hazardous materials routes. When UTA introduced Front Runner, Christensen Oil's primary access to I-15 was cut off because of the concrete center median at 200 West. And so we had to reconfigure the hazardous materials routes. We sat down with the neighbors. We came up with a couple. I actually came up with a solution. We talked to the neighbors. They didn't like this solution. We looked at the solutions they had, and so the hazardous materials route outbound from Christensen Oil is along 600 South down to 100 West. then north on 100 west to 400 south, and then east on 400 south to the signaled intersection, and then out on University Avenue. And my understanding is we have not had any issues since that was published. The second route inbound from Christensen, or to Christensen Oil from the various refineries is from I-15 down to 1860 South, 1860 South to State Street to 600 South, and then 600 South down to Christensen Oil's yard. It should be noted here that there is no route out of Christensen, inbound or outbound from Christensen Oil that does not go in front of residences. So what we've tried to do is mitigate as much of the risk as possible, but they have to be able to get in and out. The other thing on hazardous materials routes, trucks carrying fuel, there is a restriction on hazardous materials carriers within neighborhoods, but there is a 1 block exception turnaround, so that if you're coming into a gas station, say at 900 West Center, and you've got to line your truck up to make the delivery, you're allowed to go 1 block over and 1 block down to be able to line yourself up correctly. And that also includes, say, for example, when Christensen moves a truck from their maintenance shop back to their yard, they're able to go up and do a 1 block turnaround to be able to line up for that delivery. Next slide, please. There were some questions about some of the other trucks that come into the neighborhood. There are several businesses that operate along 600 South and several delivery mechanisms. You have FedEx, several of the common carriers, as well as trucks that deliver to Sunrock, up to the deck supply store, down to the roofing supply store. Our big concern with those is parking in the neighborhoods. We've turned that over to parking services. When we were working with our work group, we wanted to eliminate, or as best we could, eliminate truck traffic within the neighborhood. We talked about signing the streets, with the exception of 400 East, as no truck routes. In speaking with Shane Winters in Public Works, who's our traffic engineer, it's a lot more complicated to make it a no truck route. So they could be signed that way, but they wouldn't be enforceable. And even then, trucks are allowed to go into the residential neighborhoods to make a delivery per our city code. Next slide. So here we find ourselves, I'm sorry, one more. So here we find ourselves, how do we solve this problem with Christensen Oil? I can tell you that in our meetings with some of the neighbors and following their Facebook page, there's some Christensen Oil drama fatigue within the Mazer neighborhood. And I think that what we've tried to accomplish with this ordinance text amendment, a lot of people put a lot of effort into trying to figure this out, is trying to make a way for Christensen Oil to continue to do business as they have done for over 80 years, to be able to meet the needs of their customers going forward, and to provide the neighborhood with a sense of some kind of security about what's going to happen on the site. Some of the things that we've done in our meetings, we've opened up some dialogue between this working group and Todd Christensen at Christensen Oil, so that there are folks that he recognizes that can go in and talk to him. I think that's an important part of this solution. But it also provides us with the ability to go in and have some oversight on if he continues to add additional tanks to maintain a competitive edge in his business. It provides us the ability to do that so that we still meet all of the requirements for fire lanes, fire code requirements, containment things, all of those kinds of things. It gives the city a little bit of better working opportunity with Christensen Oil. It makes it a safer place for the entire neighborhood. Before I move on to the potential resolution, or a couple of potential resolutions, I need to clearly state that Christensen Oil runs a safe operation. There has not been a reportable incident, with the exception of a groundwater contamination, in my entire career with Provo City, and that spans 29 years. They run a safe operation. They run a good business. This is a business that we as a city should be happy to have in our city. Are they in a good place? We wouldn't put them there again willingly. I think that in 1948 they didn't see what we see. That being said, they're there. And so our potential resolutions, number one, pass this ordinance text amendment that provides the city a better hand. It requires a conditional use permit if they choose to store any more flammable liquid storage, which my understanding is they don't at this time. It also provides some oversight as they continue to keep up with the market in lubricating oils. And there's no cost to the city. Next slide, please. We can move Christensen oil. There's a big cost to that. That's an estimated cost that we got from Mr. Christensen. And then so we pay that cost, or whoever pays that cost, then what do you do with the site? If the rail yard's still right across the street. And as far as fire risk and life safety risk, the rail yard scares me far more than Christensen oil does. So we change that site over to high density residential and put dozens of families close to the rail yard. That's a consideration that you have to make. When we talk about moving Christensen oil, the city has moved in my career 2 businesses. One business was Cooney's. Cooney's had a substantial impact on the entire south end of the city, that being in a malodor. And they were moved down to Mills with the city money, some money from some East Bay businesses, and some money from the state. But they had a wide-ranging impact on the south side of the city. The second business that's been moved in my career is Action Target, and Action Target was surrounded by residential. That is not the case with Christensen oil. So when you talk about moving those businesses, there's a little bit of apples and oranges there. And then the other thing is the cost difference between trying to move a business such as Christensen's versus those businesses is substantial. We want to have a safe neighborhood. I want the people in the Mazer neighborhood to know that they are in a safe neighborhood. I've told them that time and time again. I've had the opportunity before we got to this item agenda to jump on the Facebook page and to see some of the comments of folks. Not all of the Mazer neighborhood is opposed to Christensen oil being there. There's a fairly large gathering that is perfectly content to have them there. Our goal is to make a situation that's not a good situation better, and to make sure that we have a safer situation for the neighborhood going forward. We'll entertain questions.
All right, thank you very much. Any questions for either presenter? Mr. Fillmore. You're muted, Mr. Fillmore.
Here we go again. I think it's pretty obvious that Christensen runs a very good business, that they're good business citizens here in the city. They apparently work very hard to comply with all the regulatory requirements. I guess what boils, and I think the cost of moving them is prohibitive. Then you're left with that vacant ground that has minimally positive alternative uses. My question to the fire marshal is simply help us quantify the risk, the danger factor. I mean, I think, I don't think we can completely ignore that, even though they run a great operation. But the neighbors are concerned. Help us understand if there was an explosion there, what is the blast zone? Give us some sense of the extent of the risk factor.
Thank you. To understand the risk factor, there's a couple of things, and I'll try to make this as brief as I can and still give it a pretty clear picture. So there are 2 kinds of flammable and combustible liquids. There are the flammable liquids, gasoline, that are in the tall tanks. There are the combustible liquids, which are the lubricating oils, which are in the plastic totes, and the horizontal and vertical tanks. Most of the lubricating oils flash point is 300 degrees or higher. Some of the flash points of the stuff in the totes that they want to move into the steel tanks is 500 degrees or higher. Your flammable liquids is less than 100 degrees. When you're talking about hazardous materials and hazardous fuels, inside the container, they are very, very safe. That's why I don't lose sleep at night about Christensen oil. When they're in the container, they're very, very safe. So then the question becomes, what would cause that to become unsafe? A rupture of the vessel obviously has groundwater issues that would be taken care of. They've got a system in place. Fire is the biggest danger, and fire would have to be significant. I have a son-in-law who models combustion. He's got a doctorate degree in chemical engineering, and when we were starting this process back in November, I was down with him and I asked him, I said, so if I have this big of a 12,000 gallon gasoline tank, what's the thermal inertia that's required to cause that tank to fail or to explode? And he just laughed at me. It would take an incredible amount of heat to cause one of those tanks to fail, and an incredible amount. Those tanks don't generally explode. Those are typically pressurized vessels like propane tanks. So when I look at Christensen oil, they're a very safe operation. In 2001, Liberty Safe, who is nearly directly across the street from Christensen oil, caught fire and burned briskly. And it burned for 4.5 hours. And there was no issue at Christensen oil.
So are you saying there's virtually no risk at all?
I'm saying that the risk is very, very minimal.
Well, that's reassuring.
I'm sorry, I cut you off. Christensen oil is not in my top 15 fire and life safety risks in the city of Provo.
Well, maybe that's another discussion for another time.
Yeah, that one will have to be a private one.
Okay. Well, thank you. What you're telling us is fairly reassuring.
Mr. Sewell has a hand up.
Just kind of a follow-up on that last one. You mentioned that passing this ordinance would make things safer for the neighborhood. Could you kind of walk through that again or clarify how it makes things safer?
Yes, thank you. Number one, there currently is a building permit in process that's awaiting kind of the outcome of this whole thing to add 7 additional steel storage tanks for lubricating oils, which would eliminate between 1/3 and 1/2 of the oils that are presently stored in the plastic tanks. Plastic totes. And not only would it put it in those steel tanks are in a containment basin. So that in the event that they ruptured for whatever reason, vandalism, something like that, the contents would be kept out of our groundwater by an engineered solution. Adding the steel tanks removes the risk from the plastic totes. So that's the best way to make it safer, and it can also improve some of the aesthetics by perhaps putting a building in that they could store those totes in that would also have some protections.
Also makes it safer by disallowing that.
Yeah, so I'm going to jump in, Mr. School, and also say that was one of our primary reasons for removing the natural gas storage and distribution. As far as a flammability and explosive potential, those facilities are significantly greater than anything on the Christensen oil site. And so currently in our code, any operation could go in on an inland property and establish a facility like that. And this code actually removes that. And and instead just replaces it with a limited 500-gallon accessory tank.
Any other questions for our presenters? All right, Mr. Hoban.
Yeah, hey, thank you for the information and for your diligent work looking into all the concerns that the public had. And just doing that legwork. Sounds like you've been over there a lot. One of the concerns that some people brought up was just basically, do we want to allow this business to grow, to continue to grow there, or should they basically stay where they're at, stay at the level they're at, and they need to find another site where they can grow? Does this text amendment allow Christensen to expand and grow beyond where they're at now? Let's theoretically, hypothetically, could they expand beyond where they are now? Or can they expand beyond where they're at right now? And by expand, I mean adding more tanks, adding more hazardous material. I guess we'll call it hazardous. I don't know what else to call it, but does it enable that?
I think that, and Bill will correct me, I think that there's probably still some space on the current lot to add more tanks for lubricating oils. To take that a step further, that does expand their capacity. The other side of that coin is that their lot is already prepared with the oil water separation that protects the groundwater, and it would have to be done in compliance with the code. So they'd have to have the containment basins and meet all of the safety requirements. They're not going to be able to expand on their existing site indefinitely because they have to have fire lanes and the ability to move their trucks in and out. So I think Mr. Christensen would tell you himself that they recognize that they're running out of room to grow further. But yes, I think that there's probably still some room to add some more tanks. And again, with adding those tanks, taking temporary storage into permanent storage with better safety features, in my mind, that's a better solution.
Maybe I guess clarify for me, how come they have so much in temporary storage, and why is that allowed?
Okay, they have so much in temporary storage because the lubricating oil industry is changing so rapidly. Now, about half of that temporary storage would go into those steel tanks. Some of the totes of lubricating oils are so specialized that they don't turn over enough. So it would always be in a tote, although perhaps we can do better with where they put the totes. But that's why it's just the expansion of the number and types of lubricating oil in the market.
Maybe I could address the expansion a little bit and see if this helps at all. As far as them expanding from the site on which they are located, the short answer is no, they cannot. They can't go, they couldn't buy one of the adjacent homes and put in, tear it down and put in tanks. They couldn't do that. That's not in a zone that's allowed for them to do it. Also, now the question is talking about, can they increase the capacity of the oil that they have there? Under this ordinance, yes, theoretically they could. They might be able to do that. There's a couple of constraints on it. One, just the site itself is limiting. They have to have fire lanes. They have to do things like that for fire access. So they couldn't just put tanks everywhere. That's one. The second one is every time they would try, if they're non-conforming use, every time the business owner might try to do something that would improve the site, then we have this non-conforming issue that nobody quite knows what to do with. Is the expansion the raw amount of oil they've had over the years? Or is it the number of tanks? They're actually making the site better by reducing the number of totes and putting them in permanent tanks. And so the property owners looking for, or the business owners looking for a little predictability in managing and operating their business. The neighbors are looking for safety and things like that. So this ordinance, what we tried to do is it's the best, worst decision we could come up with. And we thought, well, we can take out some of the worst things, and those ought to be taken out of all M1 zones as they apply everywhere. And Robert went over those. And now, as we've looked at all the M1 zones, we've said, okay, we could limit this, allowing it to be a permitted use to the Christensen site only. And if we do that, it gives a little more predictability to the property owner. It does protect the neighborhood more and the city in general more. But is it perfect? No. And I can't tell you how much oil they've operated or had come through there in gallons or barrels in a year. That's information we just don't know and don't have. And so I do know on site they have some tanks over the years. They used to be at full capacity. Now they're not at full capacity because the product for that tank, which that tank holds, is not as marketable anymore. And so they've shifted to other things. Did that help at all? Or?
Yeah, it does. I think it's hard to really understand. You know, I just think one of the concerns the neighbors have is we don't want more oil there. We don't want more trucks going in and out. We don't want this to grow. It seems like, you know, we talked to, or somebody mentioned, I think it was the fire marshal mentioned, you know, they've added tanks without permits. I guess when they come to us and ask to add a tank currently, let's just say current situation or historically, what are the criteria that we go through when we say, yes, you can have another tank or not have another tank? Is it kind of one of those things where it's, as long as it meets, you know, fire code, that they get another tank? Or are we taking other things into consideration? And if they have added tanks without permits, was it not a big deal?
Well, they don't. I think what people are saying when they say they've added a tank without a permit is that it doesn't need a building permit. In the past, that's been the determination of the city. That's the determination of the city now, is to put in an oil tank on your property does not require an actual building permit. The tanks are permitted through the manufacturer and then dealing with the fire marshal to make sure that they meet fire codes. And that brings up one of the unknown questions that I can tell you I don't know the answer to right now today is merely putting in a tank. If they do that, is that an expansion of their non-conforming right? And the reason for that is what is the non-conforming right? Is it if they're just putting it in to make the site safer and they're not increasing capacity, let's say, then they're probably not expanding a non-conforming right. But it makes it very uncertain for the business owner, and I understand the concerns of the neighborhood. And those are legitimate concerns about truck traffic and things like that. So what this has tried to do is give the business owner a little bit more predictability to run their business in a safe manner and make improvements, and also try to amend the ordinance to give a little better safety to the neighborhood.
So I'd like to follow up with a question, and I don't know if anyone of you can answer this, but I mean, I guess the anxiety I feel is that if we're providing more code to bring it into tighter regulation, we're also sort of, and maybe this is related to what Travis is getting at, we're sort of giving even more permanency to something that really is deeply problematic. And the problematic nature of it doesn't seem to me to go away just because we have a little bit more regulation on it. I mean, I'm completely persuaded that there aren't serious safety issues with this, but there remain some very serious concerns about the desirability of this location for this kind of business that I think are legitimate. And if we're just sort of codifying and allowing the existence of that business to continue to grow and thrive, it seems like we're only kicking the can down the road further for more conflict with the neighborhood and dissatisfaction with the neighborhood. I mean, I get that. I had the same thought that Mr. Schofield had. I was actually in the direct wind current of Cooney's when I first moved to Provo, and that odor affected hundreds of residents in the city, and so it certainly, meant that there was a certain weight on the side of the city forcing the move of the business. But it clearly is an unfortunate and everyone keeps admitting currently undesirable match, right? We wouldn't do this now. And so if we wouldn't do this now, I'm just curious why we want to sort of accommodate it even further rather than aggressively explore the possibility of some sort of other resolution. And I know that, $47 to $50 million has been tossed out. I don't see that as a final number that we're dealing with. But it seems to me that property owners, even when a business pre-exists, property owners, if there's a legitimate case for disturbance of the quality of life for the adjacent properties, it seems to me that they have some rights too. I mean, I know this is it's a balancing act, but in the case of Cooney's, that certainly was part of the problem, right? Cooney's had been there forever, but the city had allowed this adjacency that wasn't productive, and it certainly was going to get worse with time. And so eventually we had to pay the price for that. And I'm seeing sort of the same sort of problem running down the road here. Ms. I don't know if there's, before I go to the other hands up.
If I could address that question
with the presentation. We haven't opened it up to public comment yet, which we will shortly, but any responses to what I said?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And this is kind of the essence of it. And non-conforming uses, the theory is that you make something non-conforming and over time it goes away. In actual practice, that doesn't happen that much unless a city comes in and somehow amortizes out or moves a business. And you either get rid of a non-conforming use by amortizing it out, or purchasing it or something like that, like in the Cooney's case. And so as we approach this, we didn't approach it from the standpoint of buying them out or amortizing them out. That's a decision, a policy decision, ultimately for the council. And so in this, as we looked at it, we were looking at, okay, if we did move them, what kind of uses would we put in there? Ideally on that block, you wouldn't have an M1 zone on the same block with residential homes, which is what we have. So do we make it, there's a couple of possibilities. You could make it all residential. That didn't make sense because it moves the residential even closer to what the big safety concern, which is the railroad tracks. You could buy out the homes. And allow, now you have a buffer of a street from Christensen Oil to homes across the street. Or you try and realize that non-conforming uses, in fact, in actual practice, rarely go away. They continue and stay there. And assuming it would probably continue and stay there, how could we make it a bad situation just a little bit better for the neighborhood and a little bit better for the property owner? And so that's kind of the genesis of the thinking on this.
Aren't there plenty of other options other than residential or the status quo, though? I mean, for that particular piece of property, there could be a mixed use area with some light commercial and office space. I mean, we've got just farther to the west, plenty of that going on. The neighborhood plan seems to have room for some creative thinking there.
Yes, there could be other options for that, but that would require Christensen to go away at some point. And on their own, non-conforming uses rarely go away. There's either some sort of amortization, which state law allows for, in which the city has done in the past, or there's some sort of buyout of it. And again, if those are options that the council would like to explore, we could work with the council on that. But those are pretty detailed analysis that would take quite a bit of time and effort to really go through and analyze.
Mr. Hoban.
Hey, I'll try to make this quick. Could we make them conforming, but also stop them from growing? I don't know how to put it any other way.
So that's an interesting thing. The short answer is yes. So if the council was inclined to say, this ordinance makes sense, but or the concept makes sense, but before we were to pass something like this, we'd like to talk to the property owner and see if we can agree on a limitation of expansion on site. I think expansion off the current site is a no-go for everybody.
Right. No, I just meant on site. Yeah, they can still grow as a business, but they need to grow somewhere else.
Yeah, I think that would be a conversation that the council and the property owner could voluntarily enter into a development agreement where we understand exactly what the business plan is and what they have planned for the future, and put some objective metrics in it so that it would be easy to enforce and know whether they're expanding.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we normally would hear from a neighborhood chair. I do see a hand up from one of the attendees, but I don't know if that's the neighborhood chair or not, because I was hoping if we didn't have the neighborhood chair here, which I think is Ms. McClellan, or a representative from the neighborhood, I thought I would ask Karen to give us a brief summary of the neighborhood meeting that was held.
Yeah, so because this is both a citywide application and proposed by the city itself, it normally doesn't require a neighborhood meeting. So that's why the neighborhood chair wasn't expecting to do a presentation necessarily, but we, in addition to meetings that Mr. Schofield had originally had with some groups of neighbors, we did hold a neighborhood meeting on Thursday night last week, and also broadcast it on the Mazer Neighborhood Facebook group, and it's been there for people to be able to watch, in addition to the open city hall item that people can look through the information and leave comments. We allowed people to submit questions, and there were a variety of questions, but I believe most of them were ones that Mr. Schofield had seen and addressed before. I've had people reach out to me privately from the neighborhood, and just by way of disclosure, I live in the Mazer neighborhood, just a few blocks from this, and have lived here 25 years. And so, I mean, as part of Open City Hall, I've left my own comments, but I've had people reaching out to me, letting me know that they are very intimidated by some of the more vocal people against Christensen Oil, and they're very reluctant to speak. They've been trying to find ways to give comments and be anonymous, or at least not very public, so that the people who are posting a lot of information on the neighborhood Facebook group, they don't want them coming after them for what they're saying. I mean, the neighborhood's definitely split. There are people that are fine with it the way it is, and haven't had problems with it, and then there are definitely some very vocal people who are against it. So it's kind of hard to tell what the whole neighborhood thinks, because there are people on each side. But the people I've seen that are against it, they've just been very vocal, and the people who haven't had a problem with it haven't said a lot other than kind of side conversations. So that's the only thing I can really make you aware of, is that it is kind of split, and as is the case most of the time in a neighborhood meeting, the people who are unhappy about something show up, and a lot of people that are okay with it have a tendency to just skip it.
All right. Well, thank you, Karen, and thanks for the reminder. This is citywide. I was aware of that meeting, so I thought maybe a little bit of a report on that would be helpful.
Well, and Miss Ellsworth was at the meeting, at least most of it. So if she has a different perception of that, it would be good for her to say something. I wouldn't want to have given a wrong impression of how that went, especially since I do live in the neighborhood.
Ms. Ellsworth, do you want to say anything? Yeah, thank you. Go ahead.
I just concur with Karen. I think that's an accurate interpretation. I attended last summer a rally, basically. I'm not sure what we would call it, a gathering of activism at the Mazer Park, where citizens were really concerned. And I think they didn't have as much information back then as they do now. And hopefully that information is permeating that area. But it's typical. It's very, very typical with changes and developments for people to be really vocal in opposition. And if you don't mind, if it doesn't bother you, you just don't phone in. You don't call in, you don't type in. So yeah, I think there's definitely some concern, and I hope that we do our best to get the word out about what is safe and what could be of concern. And our own fire marshal has spent countless hours trying to do that, and hopefully we can help him.
All right, thank you. All right, well, we'll turn it to public comment. There are 2 comments, and I'll just ask you to state your name and residence, and also keep your comments to 2 minutes if you would be so kind. And I'll start with a caller whose number ends in 0510. This is citywide. I was aware of that meeting, so I thought maybe.
The caller will need to mute their YouTube broadcast.
At the meeting, at least most of it. So she has a different perception of that.
If you turn off the computer and just speak through your phone, and then identify yourself and your residence, please.
The neighborhood. I didn't want to give you one impression except to say that everyone's afraid of these people who are afraid.
Go ahead. Okay, I'm muting you until, because we're hearing a lot of different noise.
I attended last.
You're going to have to mute your computer because we can hear the meeting recording.
We're really concerned. And I think they didn't have.
I don't understand. Let's see. This is still caller with 0510. Can you please mute your computer?
I would suggest hitting another one and coming back around, because I think they're watching such a delay that they're not aware.
Oh, that's probably what's happening. Okay. Well, I don't mind waiting a little bit. There may be a problem with the other people.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Might I suggest, it'll be about a 30-second delay still, but for the callers in, you've got to turn off the YouTube broadcast volume so that you can be heard in the present, not 30 seconds delayed. And then as soon as you're ready for that, the chair is going to call on you.
Okay. Caller 0510, would you like to speak?
If you would be so kind, with caller whose number ends in 0510.
Unmute. Hello.
Yes. Hello.
Hello. Can you guys hear me?
We can.
Okay, good. Thank you. There are three of us here, so I hope it's all right if we all just share the same phone. My name is Ted Bueller, and I am a legal resident of Portland, Oregon. I live in Provo, Utah, 6 months out of the year, next door to Christensen Oil. When I moved here, I understood that Christensen Oil was grandfathered in, and that meant that it was not allowed to expand. And I thought, well, that's not the best neighbor to have, but it's not the worst since it's not going to expand. But they've added one oil tank, a bunch of temporary totes, 2 warehouses, and a bunch of other things, and it just smells more like lubricating oil now than it did when I bought my house. And that expansion degrades my quality of life, degrades the health of myself and my tenants and the value of my home. I have some problems with the proposed ordinance. I don't like how it allows diesel fuel. It says allows combustible liquid class 2 diesel fuel, flashpoint of 126 degrees Fahrenheit, where all along Fire Marshal Schofield has told us that it would only allow lubricating oil, class 3 oil. I don't like how it doesn't have a requirement to remove the temporary storage that they have all over the backyards of the neighborhood. And I also don't like that it removes the setback requirements, because I understand that could probably allow them to add taller tanks behind my house where there's now lower tanks. These are all freebies for the M1 occupant of Christensen Oil, and is potentially at the expense of the residential users. Instead, I think that if the business wants to expand but isn't allowed to expand at its current site, you should do the same thing that you do for almost every other business in the city. You say, okay, well, you should find some suitable land elsewhere, and you should move part of your operations over there. And if you do want to let them allow tanks, and I appreciate some of the councilors spoke about this, you need to limit the total amount of oil that can be stored on the site. The Fire Code requires that they file an annual hazardous material inventory statement, and they haven't done that for 20 years as far as I can tell, and that says how much oil they have on the site. You should get one of those now and make sure it doesn't go above that. And don't waive the setback requirements. And I appreciate Dave Harding's proposal to limit it to the current Christensen site block, and you should probably also exclude the house at 554 South, 300 East from that, which is zoned M1. We don't want them to buy that house and turn it into part of the facility. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you. Is that I'm happy to let the second person on your phone.
Yes. Okay. Here is number 2, and then we got 3 after this.
Okay.
Hi there. My name's Carolina Allen, and I am just neighbor a couple of blocks away from Christensen Oil, and I love living here. I am concerned about the fact that not a lot of people know that this is happening. I actually went around the neighborhood to, just a couple of blocks in about a half hour, 45-minute span, and just let them know, hey, did you know that the city is planning to rezone from M1 light industrial to something that, could potentially expand Christensen Oil? A lot of people were really just shocked that this was happening and that they didn't know about it, that there wasn't any kind of formal notice coming from the city. And so, I had maybe over 36 signatures on this petition of people that were just concerned that this was happening and that they didn't know about it, and that they did not want Christensen Oil to expand, and that this potential rezoning, could allow.
Whoops. We seem to have lost her. We lost the, I don't know, it still says we're connected.
Hello. Hello.
Yeah. Hello. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. So there's significant neighbors that just don't know that this is happening. And I would, ask you to perhaps delay the vote for a couple of weeks, and maybe that we can get other neighbors aware that this rezoning is taking place, because from the 36 plus people that I spoke to just within a 40-minute span, they didn't know that this was happening. They were concerned about it. They don't want Christensen to expand. And so is there any way we could just delay the vote for 2 weeks so that we can, get more input from the rest of the neighbors whom this will impact?
Thank you.
We would like the city, if the city could inform them, that would be terrific.
Thank you. All right, who's next on that phone?
Okay, this is Rachel Favero. I'm also a resident of Provo and of the Mazer neighborhood. Sorry, I'm trying to pull up my notes while we are getting all these things. So the city has acknowledged again and again, and tonight even, that this is not an ideal situation. So why would we want to allow it to continue expanding? Isn't this just allowing a bad situation to get worse? Gary McGinn says that this is the best, worst decision. Is this really how we should be operating? And would you truly want to live next to this operation? We're being told that these changes will allow for better regulation, but there are already processes in place that have not been followed, processes like the permitting process and some of these safety things. And just how this has been dealt with all over. While we've been bringing issues of concern to the city, we've been being met with lack of responses, being excluded from so-called neighborhood meetings, and generally disregarded and told that there are no problems. Yet because of our attention, some changes have been made, like no smoking signs added, adjusted hazardous material truck routes. And I learned from the meeting tonight about crash protection barriers being added just today. So obviously our concern and our attention here has been helpful and is making the site safer. But we're being told that the site will be made safer by transferring materials into larger scale tanks. However, we have no guarantee that Christensen Oil will not simply add more products into these temporary storage containers. Todd Christensen himself said that he intended to continue at expanding and adding more materials, and that there's no reason he should limit the amount of temporary storage totes he has there. He said this during the on-site tour that I attended with the fire marshal and other city officials. So I'm concerned that we're being told that this is going to make things safer while there's actually no guarantees being put in writing. I want there to be no expansion of drops of oil on the property or in general, and I want the vote to be delayed. Thank you.
Is there anybody else on that number?
Nope, this is all of us here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll go next to the phone number that ends in 4451.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. This is Sam Ullman. I am the vice chair of the Mazer neighborhood, and I live a couple of hundred feet from Christensen. I would like to request that this vote be put off for a few weeks because there are so many unanswered questions in my mind. I could refute many of the statements of our fire marshal with the details from the fire code, and also the containment issues. From an engineering standpoint, they're seriously flawed. A city person called or put out an email saying that Christensen, with this change, could expand across the street and could buy 3 other properties adjoining their property, including a house. And we just heard that a house wouldn't happen, but there's a house zoned M1 already. To take a bad situation and make it bigger doesn't seem logical in any sense. And there's thousands, literally hundreds of apartments being built on the truck route right now. The investors for the mill race program are looking for more investors, more money. That's where the trucks are going. there was a camera put up to watch the infractions or the misdemeanors. Nothing was done, but we did get the routes changed. But we're talking about every single day running the stop sign, going through the neighborhood with flammable. And by the way, diesel is considered flammable once it's on a truck. The placard says, got a 3 on the bottom of it that says flammable. So things change depending on where it's happening. There's so many issues here that Lynn and I have the fire marshal have agreed to meet and discuss some of these issues from a technical standpoint, but with the current virus, it's incredibly difficult to share documents. Thank you so much for your help on this, and thank you, City Council, for listening to everybody on it.
Thank you, Ms. Wellman. All right, we'll go next to the phone that ends in 9893. And let me open you up here. Let's see. Go ahead.
Hi, am I on?
Yes, hello, you are.
Hi, this is Ryan Hayes. I'm calling in from the other side of Center. I'm up in Joaquin. And but I do have a lot of friends down in Mesa, which is why this matter has come to my attention. And I see that there is probably no point in incentivizing Christensen to stay or to grow where they are, given the fact that, as one person in the council put it, that there is low risk, meaning that there is risk. I think that if the neighbors, especially the closest neighbors, don't like what's going on over there, that well, let's say that Christensen Oil should be incentivized not to abide there, or at least not to grow there. They're growing elsewhere, and I don't know what the city can do to make such an incentive. But the point being, it's not safe because there is risk. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. Let's see. Trying to do multiple things here at once. Okay, so I don't see any other hands up from the public. I believe those are all the numbers that have called in and spoken already. Actually, I'm not entirely sure about that. I see a different number there, but no hand raised. So we'll bring it back to council for discussion. Remind the council that this is the first time this item has been heard, and so if any one member of the council desires to continue this item, it will be automatically continued to our next meeting. Ms. Ellsworth.
Yeah, I would prefer to continue it, but I'm happy to have a discussion now with council members. I do have concerns about these two different land uses that have grown up next to each other for the last, 6 decades, 7 decades? And I just hope that as a council, we don't repeat that what's become a mistake, right? So I hope we don't approve residential next to heavy rail lines outside of an ITOD zone, like in South Provo. I hope we don't perpetuate these problems for future council members. And this issue specifically is interesting because we're changing the manufacturing zone, but we're looking at one specific site. So I think it's important that we distinguish between updates we want to the manufacturing zone and a separate issue that is, do we want to contain a business? Do we want to restrict a business? Certainly manufacturing has impacts on neighbors, and that's applicable to other issues that we're working on right now, but I'm not sure yet how to delineate between the needs of Christensen Oil and the Mazer neighborhood and update the manufacturing zone. So I'd like some more time to think through it and maybe work with staff and make sure that the neighbors get the information that they need.
Thank you. I'd maybe like to add a comment. Gary McGinn mentioned that it's a rather complicated process to, explore the possibility of amortization or purchase and relocation. So I don't know how to tackle that specifically, since I'm not familiar with the intricacies involved. But I don't want to just walk past that option without further information to help us think this through a little better. In an ideal world, which we're not in because of COVID-19 in particular, our economy is tanking, and we just got our budget proposal, and the city is not in a position currently, and I hope the public understands that, to make a massive kind of purchase like that at this point. So we're in a bit of a pinch, but I would like to get a little bit of a clearer picture of what a relocation option might look like. I'm assuming again that the number we're looking at is a pretty rough one. I'm assuming, and maybe I'm wrong, but I'm assuming it doesn't include the resale of the property and the reinvestment of the property that we would presumably get back. So I don't know that that's. So I guess I'm just, if we have a clearer picture of what those options might look like, that certainly would help me be able to look at this a little more carefully, because that to me is the ideal. That's not a worst case scenario. I think that's a best case scenario if it's affordable, if it's manageable for us. If it's not, then I think we've got to look at some other options. But I'm just, like I've already expressed, I'm just nervous about perpetuating a problem and maybe even codifying it even more to the point where we've disincentivized the resolution that I think needs to happen, which is, to put it in, I don't know how else to describe it, but a kind of divorce, right? I mean, these are neighbors that don't really need to be together, nor should they want to be together. So I think if we can't find that kind of a solution, then we'll have to figure something else. But I'm just a little worried about bypassing that prematurely without taking a closer look at that. So I don't know if that's helpful to staff, and I hate to be asking for much more work when you've already been doing so much. But I think for the sake of public trust, if we don't at least take a very serious look at what that might involve and how it might work and whether or not it's feasible, I think we'd be doing them a disservice. Mr. Hoban.
I've got 3 questions, but before I ask these questions, I wanted to respond to something you said, Mr. Hanley. And I'm not discounting what you were saying in any way, but I would venture to say almost everybody that lives near this Christensen Oil bought their home after Christensen was existing. So I think there's something to think about there with the precedent we might be setting, where you have a business that's existing, people come in and buy homes and then say, I don't like this business, we want it out. I guess I'm not saying that we shouldn't look at that option. Something about that doesn't sit well with me, but I don't want to really dwell on that right now. It's just something that kind of, I don't know. I think it's worth thinking about and what precedent we might be setting there. But my main 3 things I had. So for the fire marshal, I guess, is there a report they're supposed to file that shows every year that shows how much oil they have on site? I think it was Mr. Bueller mentioned that and said that they hadn't filed it in 20 years. Can you answer that question for me?
There is a Tier 2 report that's supposed to be filed. I had a copy and I don't know where I put it, and I don't remember the date on it, but I will follow up on that.
Okay, yeah, it seems like that would be an important thing for us to keep track on, keep a pulse on. I guess a follow-up to that, if these guys are non-conforming, like I've got nothing against businesses, but if these guys are non-conforming, why can't we just say, look, we're not going to kick you out, but you can't grow anymore. You're non-conforming. Is there a reason we can't? Did I miss that in the discussion? And if I did, I apologize. I know there was a lawsuit a while back that were allowed to stay because the zoning came after they were already existing. But wouldn't we have the ability to say, all right, you can stay, but you can't get any bigger? Or is that not an option for us legally?
Legally, a non-conforming use cannot expand. But that's—
So how have they expanded?
That's, yes. You know, what does expansion mean? There's case law all over the country about exactly what that means and expansion. And so, and then you look at it, well, okay, is this technically an expansion, but are they doing something that actually makes the site better? Like putting in those tanks. If they put in those tanks, the site will be a little bit safer. But if the determination is no, you can't put in those tanks because that's an expansion, then you got to ask yourself, okay, did we win the battle but lose the war on that one? And so that's trying to balance all of those issues. And as a city, we have not gone down that road yet to analyze if everybody lawyers up and let's just do all of that. We've been taking this approach of, okay, from the premise that we're not getting a divorce, we're here together, how can we make it a little bit better for each side? Now, if the council wants us to go from a different premise, that's a whole other avenue and a lot more work to explore those things. Not that we can't, but it's just we're not ready with those answers today.
Well, no, I'm not suggesting that. Don't get me wrong. I guess what I'm asking, I guess historically as well. So obviously, if we allow these storage tanks, they're going to be conforming, they're going to be safer, but they are going to add capacity. And then how do we stop them from using temporary storage again, right? Somebody brought that up where we're going to add more tanks and then they could just roll in more temporary storage or whatever. I know there's some fire code and stuff, but also historically, how have they expanded if they were non-conforming and weren't supposed to expand? They've added tanks over the years, over these decades, right? So since that lawsuit where they said, where it was determined they could stay, how have they added tanks? Did we give them permission to, or did they just do it? And I guess what I'm saying is, it just seems like we've just kind of turned a blind eye to this. And we created this problem. Maybe back in whenever it was, 1999, if we had said, no more tanks, guys, you're stopping where you are, we would have avoided this issue. I guess, how have they expanded over the last, let's say 20 years if they were non-conforming and weren't supposed to be able to expand? Well,
there's a couple of issues with that. Number one, what is expansion and did they expand? And is just putting in a new tank expansion when maybe the tank's going in and handling different types of oil capacity? Those questions I don't know the answer to. I think there's one group that we haven't heard from tonight, which is Christensen Oil. I think a lot of these questions would be good for Christensen Oil to answer. What's their intent? What do they want to do? If this goes through and they can add tanks, how does this make the site better? As staff, we've worked with Christensen Oil and have talked with them about things, but I think that's an important issue for the council to understand and deal with. And I think a continuance, I don't think that the council's ready or has the information that they need to make a decision tonight. And so I think a continuance makes a lot of sense. And as staff, we don't object to one at all. And in the meantime, it'd be good to understand what questions the council has, that information we can get back. And some of that information I've heard tonight, we need Christensen Oil to talk about this.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Appreciate it. And I don't want people to think that I'm anti-Christensen Oil by any means or anti-business. I'm hoping that there's some way we can make both sides happy, Christensen can continue to thrive without worsening the issue. And you know, the residents can also feel some sort of closure on all this. So thanks for answering the questions. Appreciate it.
Ms. Ellsworth.
Yeah, I appreciate Travis's point. The folks who moved into this area, they moved there after Christensen Oil was built. And I think that there's like probably some case law for this that Brian Jones or Gary McGinn will tell us about people that move next to a farm and then the farm gets all smelly and people want the farm moved and what do you do, right? Or if we allow housing next to a railroad track and then that's dangerous and loud and then people want the railroad track moved, I think that would be an unusual precedent. So maybe there's some alternatives to moving or buying out Christensen Oil. But I would be interested to know from staff tonight or in 2 weeks or in the meantime, if there's another company in town like Christensen Oil and what would the impacts to their organization be. That would be interesting to know. How many businesses will be affected by this?
There isn't anything in the M1 zone.
No comparable businesses in M1? Is there any comparable business in a different M zone?
Across the tracks is Chevron Oil.
Chevron Oil, south of the railroad tracks, and down by 9th South.
M2 South, is it?
And that's M2, which is heavy industrial, heavy manufacturing.
Okay. Are they next to homes?
No.
No.
They're primarily gasoline, not lubricated oil.
So it's a different issue altogether. Okay. Thank you.
If I could just interject really quickly on that legal question. My memory might be pretty rusty, but I investigated this pretty carefully when the Cooney thing was happening. And my recollection is there is legal precedent, even if residents move in afterwards, if there is either an endangerment or loss of quality of life that is the result of poor zoning on the part of the city, the onus is sort of on the city to fix the problem. And I don't know if the nuance is that that the business has to have increased the displeasure of the neighbors because of a change in their business. In the case of Cooney's, they expanded pretty aggressively in a very short period of time, and suddenly everyone was smelling dead pig all over the city. Anyway, and maybe Brian has more information on that, but that's what I recall.
And that typically deals with nuisance law as it applies, as not strictly a land use law.
Okay. Mr. Sewell and then Mr. Harding. And then Mr. Fillmore, it looks like.
I had a question for staff about the zone map. One of the commenters mentioned that there was a house in the M1 zone, and so I was curious about that. And I've been trying to reconcile the Utah County plat map, our zone map, and Google Maps image. And so I think I found the house that was referred to that's in the M1 zone. But it also looks to me like Christensen Oil has storage tanks in an R16A and a RC zone. And I'm just wondering if I'm interpreting the zone map correctly, or if just kind of how that all came about.
John, can you go back to my presentation? So, Mr. Sewell, the home on 300 East, the other presentation, John, that has some of the zoning maps in it, and that one forward.
Yeah, it looks like the home at 554 South, 300 East is in the M1 zone.
That's correct.
But then if you look in the north end of the block, our current zone map, at least the one I pulled from provo.org, shows that parts of the north end of the block are in R16A and RC in the same area where they've got storage tanks. So I'm just curious how that happened.
Just 1 second, Mr. Sewell. As far as I'm aware, they do not have anything in the residential zone. But I'm just checking really quickly.
Oh, I think I'm looking at the wrong block. Never mind. So sorry about that.
You had me worried there for a minute.
Yeah, I'm 1 block off.
Okay.
So thank you.
Okay, Mr. Harding.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick comment on what you talked about as far as amortization or looking at financing a move. I think from what I've seen over the years or whatever, you know, I'm skeptical that that's going to make financial sense for the taxpayers of Provo, even if we roll in the property value and all of that. But I definitely am not opposed to looking at it, taking another look at it, and seeing, because I agree that would be a very good solution. But it would surprise me if that would make financial sense. I think the amortization would be seen as fairly you know, hostile to the business, and so you know, I think we need to be very careful on that. But again, exploring those ideas, you know, I definitely am not going to object to exploring those ideas. I do want to thank the staff for so quickly responding to what was my biggest concern about opening up future conflicts with allowing fuel storage in other M1 zones that abut residential across the city. So thank you for that. I'm grateful for Ms. Ellsworth for you know, asking for this to be delayed, or you know, indicating that she would like to see this delayed. I think that with this fairly major change, having it continued allows the public to study the new proposal and respond to it. So I think that's helpful. If we look at this from the approach of, well, you know, a divorce probably isn't likely in the near future, so what can we do to make staying together a little bit more amenable? One thing that I think we should take a look at is we had this use at this location, and then through future zoning decisions, we decided that, you know, it was no longer a good use, and so it became non-conforming. But they still had property rights, and that's kind of caused some confusion about, you know, what exactly they can and cannot do. If we're going to change the zoning again with the idea that we're going to be able to regulate some stuff better or whatever, you know, I need to understand how a change like this would then make them need to follow these regulations, or, you know, why would they not be still non-conforming and still be able to do some of the things that they've been doing? I'm not certain how that goes away. So I do think that whatever we do, I would like to see some sort of agreement if we are going to accommodate some of their uses, that we get a legal agreement with them, so that, you know, any non-conforming uses are you know, given up, or agreed that they agree to follow the new zoning. So I think at this point, I think most of my safety concerns have been addressed. I appreciate that. I think most of us, if not all of us, agree now that we're talking mostly livability and compatible uses. And if that's the case, when we take this time, I appreciate what Mr. McGinn talked about, you know, having some more time to really explore this. During that time, perhaps if we take a look at what improves the livability as much as possible. And I appreciate the comments that have been, you know, trying to find the best solution in these difficult circumstances. You know, perhaps the general consensus of the people that live in the area might be, well, we don't mind some expansion as long as that looks like, you know, whatever, less portable storage. The concern is, you know, do they get rid of some of the portable storage by putting it into these permanent structures, but then immediately turn around and put back in the temporary storage? You know, so there needs to be, again, that agreement. But you know, perhaps the neighbors are saying, well, if this use is going to stay on this block, we don't mind if there's more tanks, as long as those tanks aren't taller than what's there now. Or, you know, so there may be some trade-offs there that the neighbors get more meaningful restrictions, and there just may be a kind of a win-win in there where business is able to do what they're hoping to do, but also agree to some limits with that, and that we're actually kind of pushing for the things that will actually make the area more livable for the residents that are there. I definitely hope that we take a look at rezoning the one residential house. If the plan is for that to stay as a residential use, I hope we look at, as part of this package, we look at rezoning it away from M1. And then just a final comment. I do want to say thanks to everyone who's been involved with this. This obviously has been a very difficult thing over decades. Appreciate the fire marshal, appreciate our planning staff, and I appreciate the neighbors who, you know, different people have said different things about different neighbors and how they've approached this. But, you know, I do feel like some positive changes have already been made. And, you know, sometimes residents have to make some noise to get a response from the city. So I just want to say thank you to everyone all around, and I am hopeful that we'll be able to find a solution that is in everyone's best interest.
Thank you, Mr. Fillmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The hour is late. I'll try to be brief. I'm certainly in favor of continuing this matter. There are just too many questions have been raised. Questions about setbacks and missing annual inventories, and what is expansion all about, and how can we limit it? And I don't like the citywide application. We certainly ought to restrict that to M1 zones that don't border a residential area. I like the idea of maybe a legal agreement with Christensen as a possibility of limiting certain things. But just as a practical matter, I just don't see any way in the world the city's going to pay $50 million to buy this out, even if we weren't under some budgetary stress right now. Just too big an amount. And even if we did, and even if we bonded and could convince our citizens that they ought to shoulder another bond for such a purpose, even if that was possible, then you're left with some land after you clean it up, by the way. There would be significant remediation costs somebody's going to have to bear. So let's say you build a bunch of affordable housing there, high density housing. In short order, I believe those folks are going to start complaining about being right next to the railroad tracks. And you're certainly not going to buy out the railroad. I just think there's some practical limitations here that we ought to just try to be as pragmatic as possible, find as good a compromise as we can, and maybe complement that with a legal agreement with Christensen, and then move forward.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Fillmore. Any other comments from the council? It's been clearly indicated that we would like to continue this item. So we will do so and look forward. And if there's any more feedback you need from us as a council about what you'd like to see before we meet again, please reach out, or if any council members would like to reach out to staff on that, do so as well. All right, let's see. We are automatically, I mean, do we need to identify who the person was who wanted the extra time? I think all of us, or most of us, indicated so. So I think we're okay just moving forward with this being continued. All right. If there is no objection, counselors, you will want to speak up with your mic off or mic on if you want to object, but we will now adjourn as the Provo Municipal Council by unanimous consent. Thank you all for being here, and thank you to all the staff and to our public for participating tonight.